Hello everybody. For today's video, we're going to be talking full spoiler thoughts for all of Wind and Truth. And at some point, we might also talk about comparisons to other things in the Cosmere. But if we do, we'll make sure to put up a Cosmere spoilers banner in case you haven't watched or read, I should say, in case you haven't read all of the Cosmere. But jumping into it, I think the person who most recently finished was Christy. And if you could give either a single word or maybe just a couple of words to capture your thoughts, what do you think they would be? We'll give everybody a little sprinkle of our thoughts before we dive into specifics.
I feel like we always start with me because I'm always the one who recently finishes.
Sorry.
If I could sum up this entire book in one word, I think it would be exhausting. I was like so tired. Yeah. Okay. So I'll say the ending where we left off is satisfying in my eyes. Journey before destination, but the journey was way too long.
Do you feel like exhausting also in part because of positives, as in there were certain things that were emotionally exhausting, or are you pretty much excluding those things and you're specifically saying it took a lot for me to get through it?
Yeah, it just took a long time to get through it.
So maybe a little or maybe a lot on the negative side more than positive, you would say.
I'm actually pretty mixed. I know I have shared like a lot of criticisms about this book in our past chats and stuff, but I think the ending kind of made up for it.
Made it worth it.
Yeah.
So, Sophia, would you say that's similar for you? I don't think so, based on our previous discussions. Yeah.
I mean, my main word is satisfied, but I can't remember. I remember as when I finished, I was messaging my friend Jessie, not this Jessie, a different Jessie. And she was like, what 3 words would you use to describe this book? And I was like, I mean, the first one was dazed, because that's just how I felt when I finished. I was like, whew, that was a lot. So I guess a lot as well, but mostly satisfied.
That reminds me, don't worry, it's not a Cosmere spoiler, but I am going to bring up the character Sazed for a second. I remember for a while, people didn't know how to pronounce Sazed, so they thought it was Sazed, and they would be critical of Sanderson if he said that Sazed was dazed, because they're like, it rhymes and it doesn't flow well, and you're like, I don't know if that's even how you say it, though. But anywho, that just reminded me because of the fact that basically you said the word and it popped into my head. Yeah, you were dazed. Jessie, what would you say if you had to very quickly capture your thoughts?
I agree that it was exhausting, but more emotionally exhausting, I think. I'm more on that side of it, as it was kind of emotionally exhausting. At the end, I felt like I wanted to stare at a wall for 2 hours and like could not compile my thoughts. But it was satisfying mostly.
Okay, we'll get into in a little bit what maybe didn't quite fulfill, but also all the things that did for you. Sarah, what did you say for yourself? I think you said shook when you messaged us.
I did say shook. But I definitely agree with exhausting, because it took a lot out of me to like be reading this book for so long. So shook and exhausted.
I almost feel like, Sophia, exhausting almost fits some of your feelings from a different angle, though, when you talked about how in a different discussion that you needed some of the levity because it was emotionally taxing to read this book, and the suspense was really high. Agreed. Roger, we'll skip me and then we'll come back. What would you say for yourself?
I think overall I had fun. I don't think I found it like particularly exhausting. It was long for sure, but like I think I just had like a campy fun time with it.
Yeah, you seem to be having a good time. When I finally finished, was catching up with your messages. I could finally listen through them. I would say for myself, I'm a little conflicted. And this kind of is specific to one of the problems we've had continuously throughout these discussions, the expectations versus realities of what we got with this book. And part of why I'm conflicted comes down to what I was thinking this book would be. Part of it being that the way we've been told Stormlight was going to play out was that we would get these 2 arcs. And we did, certainly. I mean, I definitely think this feels like a pause in a lot of ways. I also think, though, that it didn't really feel entirely like a conclusion. I by no means was expecting this to be end of Mistborn Era 1 level conclusion. We all knew that there was going to be a much closer time period between arcs 1 and 2 than what we get with the Mistborn eras. But I think I still thought there would be a lot more that would wrap up. And I would say a lot of us, although we'll discuss this, have new questions that have come up, or now it feels like we've only just set the stage for a new era for all of the Cosmere. And I was expecting maybe a little bit more of a wrapping up for certain plot lines in a lot of ways. I really do feel like we've just sort of settled, and then there will be time between rather than feeling a satisfying conclusion. So I don't think I would describe my reading experience as satisfying necessarily in the same sense. But I am, to Christy, your point about the ending definitely sets everything up. I am interested and excited for what's going to come next. But this book, I think in actuality, felt much more for me like a middle book than a final book, which is a weird feeling to have when you thought it was going to be more of a final book. But for everybody else, how would you say your expectations were met? And what maybe were you wanting more from this book? And then what were you wanting maybe, what do you feel you got out of it that you were hoping for? Roger, do you want to kick this one off?
Sure. I don't know that I had a ton of expectations going in. I knew that it was supposedly the end of the arc, but I was just very curious like what that was going to end up meaning, because I kept being like, are we going to deal with Odium in some kind of meaningful way? Are we going to have some kind of meaningful things with just characters? Like I was very, so most of the time I was reading it, I was like, where are we going to leave this off? So I don't know that I had a ton of expectations that were or were not met, because I was just kind of along for the ride. I do think that the first half took too long to get to some of the reveals. And so the reveals being kind of mainly packed in the last 20% made it for a kind of weirdly paced reading experience, I would say, because like, yes, I had a great time with all those reveals, but if they had been kind of spread out a little bit more, I think we would have had time for emotional impact in better ways.
Emotional impact is, I would say, another reason I felt somewhat conflicted, as I would say so many of there are so many iconic moments in this series. And I certainly think in concept, there were iconic moments about this book. I just don't know that any of them really pulled at my emotions the way something Roger and I agree with. And I think a lot of the fandom does, is the we have to turn back moment in the first book. I think for a lot of people, Dalinar saying, you cannot have my pain. Elhokar, when they're in Kholinar, is a really big moment for a lot of people. Of course, the Honor is dead, but I'll see what I can do is really cool. And I don't know that for myself, I had those scenes. I know, especially in Rhythm of War, there were some that made me really emotional. And I just don't know that I felt that quite to the same degree. So that was something I think I experienced as well. Is there was a sense of, it's a lot of information pouring in, and then there's a lot of reveals, and then we kind of just leave off. What would you say, though, Christy, for yourself, your expectations versus your reality of what you got?
Sorry, I definitely agree with the emotional impact part. I feel like this book I feel the most emotionally distant from, because there weren't any specific moments that I felt like, crying, because usually I love crying in books, but like this one, like there were a couple moments that came close, but it didn't quite hit all the way. And not so much expectations, but more stuff that I was hoping for, like wrapping up some like characters' arcs. I was hoping that we would wrap up a lot of those arcs, especially Shallan. I feel like she's had like such a long journey, and I'm glad that, she is where well, not physically, but emotionally.
Yeah.
You're glad that she's finished forever.
Right? We're glad
she now has to have a long distance relationship.
It's better that she's, emotionally healed to an extent, so it makes things a little bit better that she's there. Also, I was hoping, so I was expecting and hoping that the whole like Dalinar versus Odium Taravangian thing would be done with. I was like, I'm so sick of these two. Their conversations are so repetitive. And I'm like, you know what? In the end, I'm glad Dalinar died.
Oh,
But did he?
Yeah, I know that's
But
the
did
like
he?
Well,
the
so-
Blackthorn, I guess.
Blackthorn, I like more than Dalinar.
Yeah, but they were connected, so he has some of the memories of Dalinar. That's the whole thing about why he's able to be pulled out. So is he?
But I'm hopeful.
You're hopeful that he's that the
You're hopefully he's just gonna
ruminating
stay
old man
Blackthorn
Dalinar is
evil.
gone. You just want the war criminal back.
Well, from a storyline
Fair.
and from an engaging storyline point of view, not because I support his actions. Okay.
What did you think? I'm getting a little off track, but just because you mentioned Dalinar and this kind of final showdown sort of thing, we'll get more into that also, as we'll also get to all of the other characters. But what did you think of the "I understand you" ideal words? Because I find a lot of times the moments where they say the ideals are some of the gut punch type of moments, and you have him saying it. Szeth kind of had a cool moment of skipping an ideal and then giving it up, and Kaladin had, like all of it's kind of happening at once. And it felt so explosive, but I don't know if I was feeling all the typical emotions I do when that happens. Would you say that was true for you, Christy?
So the words themselves, like I understand you, I feel like, they are a little bit, underwhelming, I guess, but I think it encompasses like the whole thing that they were getting at what honor was, because they were thinking honor was one thing, but it was completely different from how the power thought of itself. And I do like how that ended up coming together. Like there is that like juxtaposition of him, like honor thinking that he understood him like the way that honor thought of itself, but then it ended up kind of combining to be something even grander.
I liked the words themselves, and I think that they hold a lot of meaning. It's just that whole part, there's just so much happening. I think that it's hard to really settle in and allow the words to really impact you. But I'll admit, to your point about you feel like there's some repetition in a sense with Dalinar. I've said before that in Way of Kings, Dalinar's visions are not my favorite things, and I think I might have brought this up in a previous Wind and Truth chat. But it was pretty much most of his arc in this book was Dalinar having these visions to understand the past a little bit more, and so it made sense to his arc, certainly. I think it's such a grand thing, though, which makes sense because it has to almost be God level of understanding as opposed to just like one-on-one. But that's the whole kind of cool part, is it's not God level from a distance. It's almost like he's now experienced true unification in before he was trying to unify everybody by just being a bulldozer and sort of forcing them into his way. And now it's from a level of understanding, which I like. Anyway, Sophia, what about for you? Back to the main prompt currently, expectations versus reality.
I think, like Roger, I didn't necessarily have any particular expectations for this book. I really didn't know what to expect with the way that Rhythm of War ended up, especially with Taravangian as Odium. I really was just like, okay, so where are we now? What's happening? I had no idea. So I didn't necessarily have anything to compare my experience to in terms of what I was expecting. I definitely didn't expect to get as much about the Oath Pact. I definitely thought that was going to be more of a thing for the back half of the Stormlight Archive. So I guess it kind of went in some directions that I hadn't anticipated, even though I didn't know that I anticipated it until I was reading it, and I was like, oh, I really didn't see that coming.
That makes sense.
But yeah, I mean, I enjoyed it. I liked the answers that we did get, even though those weren't the answers I thought that we would be getting. And I think that's probably why I feel so satisfied with the book, because it, I don't know how to explain what I mean, but like it ended with, for me, enough answers. And so in that sense, it kind of met my expectations, because I was kind of seeing it as like a partial end, and it felt like a partial end to me, like enough of one. And also it really reminded me, especially the second half of the book, really reminded me of the other series finales that we've had. So
Yeah.
in that sense, I guess it kind of met my expectations, because
There's
I have very
certainly
similar feelings.
Yeah, there's certainly some parallels there,
Yeah.
which we'll get into probably more at the end of the discussion, just because those will be more specific
Spoilery.
potential Cosmere spoilers. Yeah, I really
Mhm.
quick. Good morning. I DNF'd at the end of day 7 last night. I've enjoyed these discussions more than the book itself. I just missed the style of books 1 and 2. We will we'll make sure that we finish the expectations versus reality for everyone in this discussion, but we have touched on a bit here and there the comparisons between this book and other books. I actually want to save that part of the conversation for a little later, just because it has been something we've brought up before, and it kind of naturally came up through that video about Sanderson responding to criticism, so that in a sense was almost like a dedicated video discussing that. But now that we've all finished the book, I do want to at least still talk about that a little bit. But I think you're not alone in feeling like there's a difference between the beginning of Stormlight versus now. But man, I don't know that I would have DNF'd it, because it's such an investment too, that I feel like I would have had to push. I don't normally feel that way, and also, just to be clear, I don't feel like you should have to feel that way. But once you poured so much into this series, I think it'd be hard. I would just be like, I should just push through.
Especially at day 7, I feel like it was starting to get exciting, but to each their own.
I think that I was more engrossed, certainly once day 7 started, but I would say day 8 and beyond is when things, which it makes sense, right? Because that's the last portion of the 10 days and the end of the book and Sanderson's way of building to things. But I am curious, does that mean you're done with the series, or are you going to just look up what happens and then maybe start fresh with the next Stormlight books? Because I mean, I could see that being something that some people do. Jesse, though, expectations versus reality for you.
So, like, I kind of went into it with like lowered expectations. Like, I knew we were going to get some sort of cliffhanger. I had a feeling we were going to get some sort of like some answers and then be left with more questions, because I'm like, it's the end of an arc, not the end of the series. So I tried to temper my expectations, because
you had better. I think you had a healthier set of expectations than I did.
I mean, it's not what I wanted.
Oh, okay.
To be clear, I wanted a nice, clean, pretty, everybody's happy ending that I knew I wasn't going to get.
Oh, I mean, I didn't want that, but
like, I was like, I want something clean and pretty and happy, but I knew we were not going to, like, there's no way on this earth we're going to get that.
You just want everybody to relax.
Yeah, I just want everyone to like have a vacation.
Can everyone like be like the heralds and just go in this month?
Right? Can everyone just go like have this nice little beach vacation? That would be great. But it was definitely, I think, more questions than I expected. But I don't hate that, because now it's like that feeling of anticipation and like, okay, well, what's next? And what's next in the Cosmere as a whole? But also, I'm satisfied enough. The end, kind of like that Sanderlanche, I have to say, it's like some of the reveals were just too, it's like so close together that I'm like, I don't have time to feel all of them.
That makes
sense. I mean, the whole book was a Sanderlanche. I feel like we were at 100 the whole time, so there was never really.
Yeah, I mean, I did like the comical moments that we got. Like, I think, like Sophia said, to kind of lighten that mood. There were some that I really just thought were funny and loved. I'm like, oh, I need a good laugh right now, because I feel like I'm running with a freight train. But I enjoyed it, and I'm excited to see what happens going
you said
forward.
That like you're not supposed to. Like, I'm sorry, everybody, but I thought it was good.
I had fun. I was emotionally stressed the entire time.
Oh yeah.
You
And
know,
sometimes you need that.
as far as the Standerlanche level, I feel like the best way to describe it, or perhaps not the best, but my cheesy analogy I'm gonna give anyway, is like when if you're on your computer for whatever reason and you have the volume turned up all the way on your computer and you need to put your headphones on, and your headphones can go up in volume louder than your computers. So you go to put your headphones on, you're like, oh my gosh, ow, and it hurts your ears because there's just the volume's way higher than you expected. To me, that's how this felt. Like the whole thing, the volume was turned up, but it somehow still got louder in some fashion. Sarah, expectations versus reality. I do really quick want to say we will get to the questions that we all have now, but I do feel like naturally that goes hand in hand with potential Cosmere spoilers. So I'm also pushing that back, but we will get into, because a lot of us throughout are like, there's more questions now. So I promise we'll get into that. But Sarah, what would you say expectations versus reality? How was that for you?
I was kind of expecting the characters that we've followed through these first 5 books to have a bit more resolution to their stories. Like, especially Kaladin, like how he's going to be important going forward. I was not expecting that at all. I was like, Kaladin, Shallan, Dalinar, like these characters have had their books. We've seen them throughout. Like, I was expecting them to get more resolution and for us to really focus on different characters in the second half, but I don't necessarily feel like that's the case now based on where everybody is left off. So that definitely was not my expectation. But I am glad that we kind of left off in a spot that makes me excited for the future books and like for what's going to happen. Like that's what I was hoping for from the ending, was like to be looking forward to the next books, and that's what I got.
That was definitely done, I think, for me anyway, and it seems like a lot of us here, very successfully. I think many of us are now like, well, okay, let's, and it feels almost like a clean slate. Not to say that he erased everything in any fashion, but it does feel like there's so much potential for what we can do moving forward, which is exciting, certainly. So a lot of us were talking about arcs of the characters, and we haven't really had the chance to dive into specifics. So let's go ahead and kick it off with Adolin and his arc, which I remember when I read the synopsis for this book, and I was already surprised because it was so many characters doing so many things. And I was like, what? Because I think already that's when my expectations were kind of shifting a little bit. And I remember being surprised that Adolin was apparently going to be doing this whole quest on his own. For me, the conclusion of Adolin's arc, there was a line or a few lines in particular that really stood out to me. And there are moments when he is thinking, my feeling that I have about being small in this world now and almost like mattering less and being less significant, that is what the Dark Eyes always felt, especially in comparison to Shardbearers. And I was so happy because I feel like, while yeah, I've certainly been kind of hard on Adolin throughout the series, it's because I've wanted these moments from him. And when I want these moments from characters, it's not because I think that they're poorly written and I just want them to be perfect. It's like I want to acknowledge where they're starting. And I think that as a result of where Adolin started versus those thoughts toward the end of his arc meant that his arc was one of the most satisfying. I think he really showed tremendous growth throughout the series. He certainly, I feel like, came into his own a lot better. But ironically, Dalinar's whole I understand you, I think is almost not more applicable to his son, but it's applicable to his son in a way that we haven't really had the chance to see from him. So I really enjoyed that. And I felt like it was very, very earned. I was really pleased with Adolin's perspective. Do I think that we needed quite as much time as we had with him? No, just purely because I think a lot could have maybe been trimmed in this book from most of the characters' perspectives. But I do feel like his perspective definitely continuously got more intense, both with the emotional stakes and the literal we're in danger sort of stakes. So Sarah, since I feel like you've had to kind of go at the end, what would you say your thoughts were for Adolin's arc?
Yeah, I think he was my favorite person to follow throughout this book. I do agree that in the beginning I was like, okay, can we cut some of this? I don't need this. But definitely at the end, I was like on the edge of my seat with what was happening with him, especially when they're kind of like down to minutes like having that fight, I was like, oh my god, this is so stressful. But I don't know, I really liked his kind of like introspection, I guess is the word I'm looking for, throughout. So I really enjoyed following him, and I'm also very curious to see like how he deals with where he's left. When he got his leg cut off, I was like, oh, there's no way he's getting that leg back. And that seems to be true for now. So I'm curious how he'll deal with that like long term.
I am curious too. I think Roger, you can obviously chime in here, but I think you a little bit feel like, well, he kind of got it back.
Yeah, I mean, because they kind of like almost immediately he was able to fight again because the sharp plate just kind of magically made up for it. So he kind of got like instant magical pseudo fix. So that one was like a little bit of a like, well, if we're gonna cut off his leg and have him go through this whole arc of him trying to struggle to find out what he is without being a soldier, but we didn't really go there. So that was not the emotional impact for me in his arc personally.
I am like, well, just take his arm and then it's Full Metal Alchemist. But
Or Star Wars, or
He's the new Loken.
they all lose a limb somewhere. There's always
Yeah.
a like lose a limb arc in so many different forms of media.
But if we could just have Renarin somehow be attached to a suit of armor, and then Adolin can have this like shard plate arm and leg, then you know, our worlds colliding. I don't know. Anyway,
Here for it.
so I asked that specific question, Roger, but Adolin's perspective in general, what would you say your thoughts were?
I think the one part that I'll bring up that you guys haven't brought up is I do think that it will probably resonate and like people's mileage will vary with how it resolved with his dad, because we did get those glimpses of like he wanted to have the moment to make it up with his dad, and he got like the magical like almost goodbye from Dalinar when he was dying, and I thought that that was probably the most emotionally impactful that this book ever got for me, was like, oh damn. And I think a lot of people can relate to that, like having something that happened between you and your parent and you want to make it better but you don't know how and you don't get the chance to do it. So I think that was probably like one of the more interesting parts of this book.
I agree. And interesting parts for him
Yeah.
as well. And a little bit, I understand for a long time that Adolin almost couldn't even address those thoughts in Rhythm of War. And so that's why you see them come out now. But just from a pacing side of things, I kind of wish those thoughts had come out a little sooner, because I think it really drove home some foreshadowing in this book. You know what I mean? Like you kind of suspected something's going to go wrong. I continuously thought Adolin was the one that was going to die. So it not being Adolin did, I would say, surprise me a bit. I also, though, think that Adolin was a character that, interestingly, even though I kept thinking he was going to die, he felt like a character that I was the most unsure what Sanderson's future plans were for him, if you will, because I just feel like there are certain characters that you're like, we're not done with them yet. Like Yasna, we're like, we haven't really scratched the surface with Yasna. You know, like we keep kind of waiting. And I think there's been talks about her having flashback chapters in the back half. And that doesn't necessarily mean that means those characters live. Like we all kind of knew that going in. But still, Adolin, I was always like, I think because I don't know, it makes me more afraid for his arc, because I constantly was like, is he gonna die? I kind of feel like he might. But then once things started ramping up, I was like, oh dang, I don't know. So I really like that I was continuously on the edge of my seat. There were certain plot lines in this that I think the foreshadowing was a little heavy, and there were certain things that ended up being a tiny bit predictable for all of our surprises that we got. There were a couple things that I was like, oh, okay. I kind of thought that would be happening. But Adolin's, I was never sure. But Christy, what would you say your thoughts were for Adolin's arc here?
Yeah, I ended up loving his arc. There were a couple of moments that made me nervous, because it's like you caught glimpses of like the darkness, and like I was worried, like what is this going to mean? Like, is he gonna go down like the path of destruction? But I love how everything was like where everything ended up in the end, and that moment where like he felt that a message from Dalinar. That's one of the two moments I mentioned earlier, like the ones that were really emotional for me. That one was the one that brought me closest to tears. And I really also liked the scene where he was in the shield wall and he kept, and then, you know, like what he was experiencing and how, like, how it felt like it was endless and he didn't know what was going to happen. And it was just so, I think it was a good lesson for him, like, or a good experience for him, because, you know, it kind of, that was when he's also kind of knowing how others who weren't in his position have experienced. And I just love Adolin and, you know, all the things that he went through and what he learned.
I definitely think, to your point, it also, I mentioned that he finally kind of had this realization of this is what it was like for the Dark Eyes. But then to compare and be like, Kaladin apparently went through way worse. Gosh darn it. That stupid bridge boy, you know, where you're like, I like that he has, in a sense, this isn't me trying to like be like, Kaladin's the best, but I feel like there is Kaladin was an underdog and he rose above the most horrific circumstances and then went on to, he doesn't know at this point, but he like literally becomes a herald. It's a pretty big jump, you know, but I like that Adolin has this appreciation for everything that Kaladin went through too. I feel like that's kind of what that also evoked in that scene of the repetition and, oh my gosh, I can't believe I still have to keep going, because it did feel kind of full circle to where we started in Way of Kings with the bridge runs. So I really appreciated that parallel there. Sophia, what about for you?
I loved Adolin in this book. I thought that he was really great. I thought his arc was really well done. I mean, we've been on kind of a journey with Adolin throughout the series in terms of his growth, but I think we really saw the massive like self-work in this one, and I really appreciated that. And I feel like he'll have an even bigger role to play in the second arc, which I'm glad about. And yeah, I really enjoyed his sections, and I agree with what everyone else has said so far as well.
I do want to address, last week I pointed out that his kind of coming in and basically pointing fingers at like, why are you guys doing it this way? And him being somewhat critical of how they operated. And I mentioned, I feel like Sanderson knows fantasy tropes. And I definitely feel like he's not just going to let this be. To me, this is signaling, just because if you've read Sanderson enough, you know he almost always does something unique with it, which made me think, I feel like somehow the culture of Aesir is going to play a role. So the whole throne room thing, I was like, I knew it. I knew there was going to be something. And I did like at one point Yanagon is talking to him about their way of governing, because he's like, well, I don't just have absolute rule. I'm not a dictator like what the Alethi have. And I was just like, yeah, I like that he's having this conversation with Adolin about like, yeah, maybe we're not perfect, but also, I mean, look at you guys. So I appreciated that there was kind of this mature, natural progression of how comfortable Yanagon felt being able to let Adolin know their side of things. And I feel like there was a good amount of push and pull with them. But I'm like, I knew it. I knew there was something, because it just felt a little too like Adolin comes in and saves the day. But I was glad it was a mix of, yeah, he does play a huge role because he is integral to this plot. He's an important figure. He knows what he's doing, but he is in a new environment and things are very different. So it would have felt too easy if there hadn't been a way that those worlds could collide meaningfully. Jesse, though, I haven't had a chance to ask you, and you've always kind of been conflicted about Adolin, right?
I've always been conflicted about Adolin. I started out hating him. And honestly, in this book, this might have been my favorite character progression. So like I went from straight up like, I hate him, I hope he goes evil, I hope he snaps, I hope he dies, to please don't die. I actually don't want that. But I'm kind of like you, like I was like, he might bite it at the end of this one. Like, I don't know if he's gonna survive, because it was so up and down. And I did have a moment where he was like, you know, the common soldier, and I wrote it down. I was like, he's, you know, got his daddy issues. And I'm like, it feels like it might be his breaking point. Is this the point where he snaps? And then he gets saved, and it's like, now he is resolving his daddy issues. And that part also hit me really hard when like the Dalinar goodbye. Like that was probably one of the hardest hitting parts where he's like, I just want to see him again. I want to make up
Yeah.
for it.
He doesn't get it.
I'm glad he did not fully get his leg back. No one mentioned it, and I wrote this down, and it was really, really small, but I feel like it's going to end up being something maybe in the back half that's going to be a big problem with Adolin. They gave him fire moss.
Oh yes, I agree.
And they're like, we only give this to people who are dying. Here you go.
Yep.
And he's like, sure. And he takes it and he's like, this is fantastic. And I'm like,
Yeah.
ooh, that's going to be a problem.
I know this is so stupid because I don't think I'm on to anything, but do you remember how earlier I talked about Maya reminds me a little bit of Teft in some ways? And I wonder if the Deadeyes have like connections to Spren because you see all of them come in at the end and stuff. And I'm like, is there going to somehow be, I'm not saying I literally think like some incorporeal version of Teft is going to show up and be like, let me help you with your addiction problem.
Let me help you with your addiction.
I
Yeah.
wonder if there's going to be some kind of way of these particular Spren have watched people throughout time struggle,
Mhm.
and I wonder if there will be a way for them to help through that. But I agree. I noted that as well, where they're like, this is just because we might die tonight anyway.
Yeah.
So as well. And I do wonder if that's going to become an issue.
Yeah.
I
I think
would-
the only
I-
thing I didn't love was his separation from Shallan. And that to me is what made it feel like middle book, like you said, like all the characters are separate. And that's like one of my least favorite tropes ever. It's like,
Yeah.
we're
Yeah, but if
all
she was
here
there,
at
she
the
would
end.
overshadow him because it was all about his journey of finding his self-worth without
Yeah.
having
But I wanted them at
radiance
least
there.
a moment together. Like
They
not
had this
even fully
power
together.
scene.
That's but at the end, that's true. Which I was
I'm
like,
just
what
And at the
was
end, they
that
have
one?
magical cell phones to call each other. They're
They
fine.
did have magical-
Long distance relationship.
right? I'm curious how that works out.
Well, since
later
Shallan
on.
got brought up, we're talking about plot lines that I feel like were really satisfying, and I gotta say, hers might have been one of the least satisfying. Well, not that it was least satisfying. It's just I cared pretty consistently, not at all, about what was going on with her. I was like, I'm kind of just waiting for the reveal that her mom was the Herald. Like, I'm kind of waiting for that. But the rest of the time, I'm like, do I care about Mraize? No, I don't. I don't feel like, to me, if there was some kind of really emotional reason why, and I understand the book did provide, like, am I destined to always kill my mentors and my parental figures? So there was that. I'm not saying it wasn't emotional for Shallan. I'm just saying I didn't feel the emotion because I'm like, I don't care if she kills Mraize or not. It doesn't matter to me either way. In fact, can she already? Because this is going on for so long. It's just every time it was Shallan, it was like, oh, I hope Renard and Verlaine finally get together. What's going on with Dalinar and Navani? Where's Mraize? Like, I felt like that was either one of the things that was happening or a combination of them every single time. And then it would be like, oh, also, I'm the daughter of a herald. I don't know. Her plotline I just didn't care about in this book. So I feel kind of bad because I think where we leave off with Shallan, she has the potential to have one of the most interesting, fun perspectives. Like where she leaves off, I was like, okay, yeah, I'm excited for what's to come with her. But the journey to get to that point within this book, with everything else going on, you have like Kaladin becoming a herald, Szeth, you're constantly wondering, is he going to be becoming a herald? What's even going on with Szeth? Adolin, you're like, oh dang, is Adolin going to die? Dalinar, you're like, what are the answers? I want to know. And then you get to Shallan, it's like, where's Mraize? I'm like, I don't care. So anyway, that's my long rant about Shallan and her perspective. Roger, what did you think?
I think she was the most annoying for me throughout this book because we just really were like quadrupling down on her not thinking through things and kind of just yeeting herself into situations and hoping for the best. Like when we first encountered Ba-Ado Mishram with her just being like, well, I know we were planning to just send in illusions, but I'm just going to go in there and see what happens with this like godlike figure. And then I hated that moment where she was being a voyeur on Verlaine and Renard and she's just there like, ooh. And I'm like, get out of here, girl. Like, stop. Like, she was like driving me up a wall during some parts of this book.
Yeah, that was her in the corner. I mean, I'm glad that she's supportive, you know. She's a supportive sister-in-law.
Just turn around. Let them have a moment. Like, God.
You know, she's so accustomed to the PDA with her man, she doesn't care if anybody sees. So I guess in her mind, she's like, I share, so you should share it too.
And it's partially the friend's fault, right? Because it's like, oh, she's watching, but like, she didn't need to be watching. Like,
Even Renarin commented, he's like, Shallan has always been a bit of a voyeur.
Well, anyway, though, but Shallan's point of view.
But with like Mraize and Yaddle and whatever was going on with Formless, like I had the least amount of investment because whenever it was getting to her, I was always like, can we just get back to like Dalinar and Avani because we're actually getting the information from them, and you're kind of like interrupting it with this random like where's Waldo nonsense, like.
So we felt similar. I was unsure when I started. I was like, oh boy, does no one agree?
Well, there was the one message where I ranted about her for like 10 minutes because I was like, why is she still doing this? Why is there no growth? Why do you not stop just like, and I get that like, yes, we're in a weird primordial soup of past events or whatever the hell is going on in the spiritual realm. But like, you guys have like a whole team there and you're talking about it and coming up with plans. And then you're the one who always just like ditches the plan without a good reason to do so.
I will say I did really like Pattern being basically emotional support animal to her when he was like, "Are you okay?" And I was like, "Ah, Pattern."
Her armor friend, Shallan, other Shallan, they're adorable. If we could just have more of that mix of her.
They didn't make an appearance much after the beginning. You almost forget. Which, by the way, I have to say, that was in relation to how that affected Adolin. I was like, that was pretty obvious because when he's like, did my shard plate care about me? Was it worried? I was like, okay, well, this is obviously gonna save the day later, you know, but maybe that's only obvious because we've all at this point read so many Sanderson books. Maybe it's not that obvious of foreshadowing. I don't know. Anyway, Jesse, we're gonna zigzag around here. What did you think of Shallan's perspective?
Yeah, she was the one that I was in, and I was like, can we just move on? Now, I was interested in the Ghostbloods themselves. So I think that's the most interesting part of her perspective for me. I wanted more information about them and not so much about Mraize, but I wanted Thydakar. We
didn't even really get that much about Mraize. We get a random perspective, and I was like, I don't need this.
Yeah. Like if we would have got more information, I guess, about the Ghostbloods and stuff, I'm kind of interested in that side of it.
I am too. I really want to interrupt our conversation really quick to say that I was very amused at Sanderson's State of Sanderson when he was like, the third Mistborn era is going to be called Ghostbloods. And I was like, remember when we all were apparently super concerned about the names of the secret projects? And now we're just going to call an entire Mistborn era the Ghostbloods? Because I'm like, for anybody that dives into the Cosmere, as soon as they get to the Ghostbloods and Stormlight, if they start with Stormlight, they're going to be like, isn't that the name of one of the Mistborn series? So I just thought that was kind of amusing. But anywho, we're all at this point, I feel like, very involved. I just think of like new Cosmere people, and it'll be different experience. Because at some point you have to be like, wait, but the Ghostbloods are kind of sort of more attached to Stormlight, right? If you're just starting. And then you're going to be like, so there has to be some connection to them here. And that'll reveal a little bit early, I think, for people. But not that I care that much. I just think it's funny when people are like, you're not supposed to call it Trust of the Emerald Sea because I didn't know yet.
Right? Spoilers. The title is a spoiler. What? I'm so sorry.
Sophia, did you feel different about the Shallan perspective?
I think
Sophia's... okay, good.
No, sorry. I think I was frozen. No.
Okay.
I have never liked Shallan. I still don't like Shallan. For most of the book, I was quite happy to get back to Shallan, but only because it meant I was also getting back to Renarin and Rlain. And I could have really cared less about what Shallan was up to. I do have to say I am slightly concerned about Era 3 being called the Ghostbloods, because I'm like, oh, I don't know about this, because I really didn't care that much about the Ghostblood stuff in this book. But
maybe we didn't do anything with it.
Well, exactly. I feel like there was just so much other stuff going on that felt more important that I
Yeah.
was just like, can we deal with these guys later? Like, we
Am I
we have bigger fish to fry.
I agree.
right
I
now.
agree. Am I the only one that thinks she's pregnant when she like touches
Oh,
her
no,
stomach
she's
at the end?
definitely
100%.
Okay,
I felt like
just
it
making
was
sure.
her.
They made the baby in the shower.
Yeah, I feel
Yeah,
like that's the
I
only reason we
remember-
got that shower scene.
That's what I
Flower baby.
said.
She's
Remember
like
when,
I
I
know.
rubbing
was
her belly.
when I was like, I feel like she's pregnant because he went out of his way to be like, guys, I don't know if you know, but they do it. You
Bump
know?
uglies.
Did you know also that creates babies?
That
Ask-
makes babies.
Ask Sil, she'll explain it to you. She's watching. So I was pretty sure when I was like, I'm pretty sure that's what just happened. The whole like, oh, it took her a while to notice, but yeah, and then she just like touches her stomach. So I was like, okay, that
She's
feels
like-
yeah.
Well,
Yeah,
didn't she say
and
like
what about how-
especially for us now? Like
Yeah.
it was like
funny
a
for
especially
herself.
now or for
Sean
the two of us or
So Sean has been like, you can tell me stuff about this book because he's read the first 3. He's like unsure if he's going to keep going. So I've been telling him some things, and I was like, I think Shalon's pregnant, and she's like stuck in Shadesmar, which like sounds morbid, but I kind of like the direction and potential of her being stuck in Shadesmar. And Sean was like, that kid's going to be weird.
I mean, that would be true anyway.
Right.
In Shadesmar, that would you have like very little. You have no chance to become accustomed to other people, and your mom is Shalon, and she's kind of her own brand of quirky, you know. So
you're the
He or she will have
grandchild of a
radiance
herald.
too.
sorry, there's 2. What'd you
Nope.
say, Sophia?
Oh,
I
she's
just said
joking,
that-
saying that he'd have Radiant too, so he'd have multiple people to interact with through Shalon.
That's that. And it would be funny if like moving forward they didn't know like how come there's only one version of you. I don't like this version. Is there another version I can talk to?
Can I talk to other mom, please?
Yeah. How weird. I guess it's not just gonna be long distance for Shalon. If she has a kid, that kid's gonna know their dad via the phone, basically the Sion phone. Anyway, okay, just making sure because none of us were bringing it up, and I was like, I don't think I made. Oh, and Zeth apparently has a wife, right? Isn't
That threw me.
I was like, well, oh man, I would have not minded not knowing that. You know, like I kind of wish it's sort of like when Kaladin had a girlfriend, when you're like, he had a girlfriend. Okay, I guess. He just glosses over that completely. Sanderson only shows this character. Well, okay, except for Relaine and Renard. They got the cutest. I feel like it's one of the best written relationships. They were in an arranged marriage. And there's no weird like sibling stuff where it's like love triangle with siblings. Have you noticed that's a trend of his? So there's none of that. Relaine and Renard were just cute. Anyway, we're not talking about that. We're talking about Shalon. So, Sarah, what were your thoughts on Shalon?
I feel pretty much the same way as
Okay.
everyone else so far. Because I was like, yeah, why are we dealing with this right now? Like, why is that more important than like the world is like ending? What this guy is like not that threatening in my opinion. Why are we
Well, it
dealing
could have
with
been important if we understood why they wanted to release Baedo Mishram, because we never really, I mean, it was kind of tangential, like maybe she would help with Odium, but like that can't be their whole end game, is just to hope that releasing a second godlike force is gonna maybe help them with the first. Like that seems like such an asinine plan.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree that there's certainly more. I think that is one of the new questions many of us have, or existing into the next chunk questions, is what the heck's up with the Ghost Bloods, which it seems like, given that's the name of Mistborn Era 3, that we'll get some of those answers.
Maybe, or we're just gonna see how they got formed.
Yeah,
No, 'cause it's in the
timeline wise, where we leave off, definitely Wit is on his way to Mistborn Era 2
Mm-hmm.
is of the whole coach job. So we know, without getting into any specifics beyond that, we know that's where he's headed. And enough time will pass that so the Ghost Bloods already were formed then, because Era 3 takes place later. But also it's like, maybe we will get some more additional information, because it does seem more tied to certain figures that are from Mistborn. So we'll see. Anyway, but is it awful of me to be like, oh, she got stuck in Shadesmar? I guess that kind of made it worth it. Because it was unexpected. I didn't think she'd get left
I
there.
didn't think she.
And then her not being able to get back, I was like, that really sucks. But also, I will say you subverted my expectations. So I do enjoy that. And then, Christy, I don't think you've had a chance. Are you kind of more in agreement, or do you have the unpopular opinion of like loving Shallan's perspectives?
I feel like I've always consistently had the unpopular opinion that I love Shallan. Like, I don't know why people hate her so much. I love Shallan, and like, yeah, she's annoying and her jokes are stupid, but I still love her. I think she's really cute. And I love that. So when I mentioned earlier, like, I love where some of the character arcs ended up, especially Shallan's, because we realized that Formless wasn't a real thing, and she actually did resolve that. So I was really glad to see that. And the Formless turning out to be Eatel, or however you say her name, I was like, what the frick? I was like, oh my god, did not see that coming. And when she like suddenly like stabbed, I was like, okay, you know what? I think Shallan's cool. Okay, when she fights, I think she's really cool. And that whole battle with Mraize and like the illusions, I was like, oh, it's like Sharingan, you know?
I don't hate Shallan. I just want to be clear. I just, in this book, her perspective just felt like it was the least significant as to the things transpiring. But obviously it's important for later. But I don't hate her either. I mean, I think some people really dislike her because of how she thinks of and treats Adolin. And for the people that really, really love Adolin, they're like, dude, what the heck? And I think they also, I mean, she is kind of, you know, like you said, constantly telling kind of cheesy jokes and isn't, I don't know, she just, her timing of things sometimes is a little funny. So I think, I don't know, she almost strikes me as a
the pair of L's joke was so bad. I was like, what is this?
But I almost feel like I prefer her cheesy jokes, which feel realistic, to some of the random weird things that pop up where you're like, oh, okay, I guess that wasn't really for me. Yeah, I am very curious though to see what
Maya calling Adolin a slut is still peak. That was hilarious. I don't care what anyone is.
I made sure to
I'm with you,
add-
Roger.
I made sure to add during the criticisms conversation that you are one of the people that thought it was funny.
I loved it.
I'll tell you.
He was such a little man-ho in the beginning, and now look at where our boy has come.
Look, he's come full circle.
She might as well have called him like an F-boy, you know, with how like out of nowhere it felt.
I like that.
I'm here for that too.
Well, we could be those annoying Cosmere people now, right? And be like, well, she's ancient, and when they came from their other world, we don't know how they talked, and we know that they had regressions in between desolations, so maybe that's...
This is why we needed the male perspective in that chat to make it valid, because like, what a great point. I gotta say, there was one moment that happened in this book that I was like, no, I will die on this hill that this was not a good moment for this. I didn't think it was funny, and it totally killed the moment. And that's when there's the like Harold Zeth Kaladin fight. And the one is like, what are you, his spren? And he's like, no, I'm his therapist. And he's like, what is
so
that?
stupid.
He's like, I don't really know. And I was like, why did you do that? No, that's a cool scene, kind of. And why did you have to do that? I didn't love the like just make Nail cry way to win the fight, and like music. You know, I understand there's more to the music than just like music. But I was like, come on.
You feel like music will save the world, Elle, that you don't just play your violin and every enemy that you've ever had just cries and is so emotionally connected to you.
The notes just like bring people to tears. What were you going to say, Chrissy?
It was so funny because it's like the wind was playing back like all the past times that Kaladin played the flute. And I'm like, he played it.
But when he
really
played it,
bad. So, like,
yeah, wasn't he like a kid with a recorder?
Yeah, wasn't he terrible?
Like,
That's all I
You're
picture
just
was like,
thinking about Okay, speaking of having been, I majored in music. Part of my degree was working in different kinds of music and different age ranges. So I was there for the little fourth graders learning to play hot cross buns on their recorders. And I'm like, that's probably what Kaladin sounded like. This awful. Like,
I was like, you know that Titanic playing really badly.
Yes.
I
yes. Okay, I feel like at the end, maybe if there's time, we got to play that for anybody that doesn't know, because you're like, yeah, that is probably exactly what it was like, and maybe I would weep too because I was like, stop. Gosh, so yeah, I wasn't a fan of, because I'm like, he's ancient. Why is being like, but how do you feel? Let me tell you a story. Why is that breaking him apart? That part for me was the closest to, which by the way, I did not like the callback to Honor is Dead. I'll see what I can do. Other people I think are gonna like it. Jesse liked it, so Jesse, okay. No, just kidding. But I wasn't a fan, but I will say that moment in Words of Radiance, the closest thing for me, and I was like, let's go, like I was getting pumped, is when Zeth's like, I'm not fighting you, and Kaladin steps in and is like, I'll be his champion, basically. And I was like, oh, Kaladin Harold fight, this is gonna be so cool, and he's like standing up for Zeth, and I was so excited. And then this kind of weepy way of finishing the fight where I was like, no. It was almost like it was a little like Disney for me, of the, like when Simba reaches out to Mufasa, or no, that's just Scar. Mufasa's his dad. When he reaches out to Scar and he's like, it's okay, just take my paw, basically, and Scar's like, no, like it's like that level of, oh, I'm being good and I'm trying to meet you where you are. And I was like, no, just let them fight. Let them fight. I would have preferred a like full-on fight, not this I made you sad fight. That wasn't really my favorite.
I think it was so funny that he tried to do the same thing to Ishar, and Ishar was like, yeah, whatever, I've heard that story before.
Yeah, he's like, I wrote it.
Right, he's like, they're gonna work on me, boy.
Who do you think wrote it, bitch?
Right? Yeah, he starts just like decimating all the stories. He's like, yeah, but he died. Or yeah, but that's not how it really happened. And you're like, damn.
I did like the way where he's making them feel all the pain, you could say. And when Kaladin essentially like is able to persevere through that because of everything he's endured, I did like that from the perspective of, for anybody who has experienced depression or things with their mental health that make it so that what is a typical day-to-day thing for other people, it's actually like a battle for certain other individuals. And because of that, it's almost like people don't really see how strong that person is because it is such an internal thing. So to have this sort of abstract representation of that in this fight with Ishar, of Kaladin being able to push forward, I did like that, but I just didn't like some of the ways that played out. And so I not only didn't like the Honor's Dead, but I'll see what I can do, I also was like, the whole you'll be warm again. I'm like, dude, that was super meaningful in Rhythm of War. And Kaladin now is just like, this is what I was told, so I'm gonna tell it to you now. And I don't know.
I'm like, open up my textbook.
Yeah. I don't know. I didn't like they weren't back to back. It felt back to back to me because I kind of flew through the last chunk of the book. But I didn't like the fact that he said, you'll be warm again, and then Honor's Dead, but I'll see what I can do. I was like, I don't need the greatest hits, And speaking of greatest hits, I did feel like toward the end of this book, there was a lot of recapping everybody's way of getting to this point where I'm like, I know, I've read the books and I read them multiple times. Like, I don't need to be reminded that. I mean, the only one that really I felt was necessary was Dalinar's, because of the fact that one, Odium's trying to break him, but more so he's trying to show Gavinor what his grandfather was like to start that process. So I was like, that makes sense. But there was a lot of like, everybody's life is flashing before their eyes. And in case you forgot, here are all these events that I've shown you already throughout the series, like reminders, which I don't normally mind reflection. It's just, we got almost like montages toward the end of everybody's progression. And I was like, I don't know. But Speaking of, this occurred with Yasna. Is that how you spell her name? It looks wrong.
Yeah.
Okay, I don't know why it looks wrong to me all of a sudden. It's like when you are spelling something so many times that you just start to see it as incorrect. But anyway, Yasna's with the whole Taravangian bringing up like, well, if you really believed this, then why would you do this kind of thing? I have thoughts, but I've been talking a lot. So let's have some of you say stuff. Sarah, what were your thoughts on Yasna?
I wanted more of her.
Yeah.
I like every time that we'd like jump to one of her chapters, I was like, ooh, this is kind of refreshing. Like, I am enjoying this. Her debate, I guess, I didn't really have any issues with because I wasn't really thinking that hard about it, I guess. I was just like, okay. I did like that they brought up, or like that Odium brought up stuff that she did in previous books that like seemed like kind of nothing at the time, but now it's like, oh, those actions have consequences like that you could never predict far in the future. I liked that aspect of it.
So yeah, more Yasna, I think, was a general. I have thoughts about the conclusion of Yasna's arc as well, but that also kind of ties to Cosmere spoilers, so I'll save those. Jesse, what were your thoughts on Yasna's perspective?
I really liked the debate, honestly. And it's like those moments where it's like I think it's going to have huge ramifications in the back part because it's almost like she needed to be taken down a peg because she's been the smartest character, the smartest. And it's like almost like she's finally not. And I feel like she might have needed that to be able to grow. Because I feel like if she's continuously the best and the smartest and knows everything, she's not going to grow and she's going to become a stagnant character. So she kind of needed that, I think, to be interesting in the back part.
It was pretty much pour salt in the wound when she finds the note from Hoyt.
Yes.
Like, yeah, okay, that probably is what's best. And Miss Independent is like, I really could use a hug. And you're like, oh, geez. I feel really bad that Yasna's going through it so much. What would you say, Sophia?
Yeah, I was really glad that the scene from the alley in Corboranthe in book 1 came back to bite her in the arse because it really bothered me at the time, and she never really saw any repercussions for that. And she was so like uppity about the way that Shallan behaved. And I'm like, you literally just murdered 3 people.
This
to
might
teach
be
a lesson?
where
Not even to them, to teach a lesson to Shallan, really?
I feel like I agree with the like what you're saying, but I feel like the wording of how that plays out has always bothered me a little bit, actually. So we'll get into that because that is part of my thoughts about that. But I agree that
the Cosmere spoilery thoughts.
No, actually, no. But we'll get into that later too. But Christy, what would you say for Yasna?
I 100% agree with Jesse because, like, we know that Yasna is going to play a big part in the second arc, and if she was continuously like, you know, super smart, super perfect, it would have been really boring to see her perspective. And I like that this gives her an opportunity, like this. Yeah, gives her an opportunity to grow and have like her own full character arc, which I'm really looking forward to. I did enjoy the debate chapter, but there were moments that I like, but a lot of the things that they were arguing were like a little bit like kind of basic. And there were moments that were, and I think this is a criticism that I have of the writing in general, where moments just felt really silly. Like there was that moment where Yasna was like, but you promised that you wouldn't attack. And I'm like, this doesn't feel right.
Like Yasna.
Yeah. But I like the, like where we ended up with the debate.
Roger, what about for you? I think you might be a little bit in the unpopular opinion camp here about that.
Yeah, I think I'm kind of conflicted because I feel like she was kind of like the wise wizard mentor figure. And I don't know that I love her becoming this like weepy mess over losing like the one debate. Because it's not like anybody necessarily died because of what she did. Like, yeah, they technically lost the capital, but we really don't have context for what that means. So, like, I don't really necessarily feel the stakes quite as intensely. And I thought that it was kind of unnecessary. Like, we either needed to spend more time building it up or just not have it. I just feel like the little bit that we had wasn't enough for me. And I've always liked her being aggressively competent. And so for her to be like so easily turned into like a nervous little schoolgirl just was a little bit like, I don't know that felt like Yasna to me. And like, sure, you can argue that maybe she had a little bit too much bravado, but I feel like we could have taken care of that with flashback chapters in the future to see how she got there and like why she acts that way. Would have been a more interesting fleshing out to me of her character than her being like, oh, you brought up something I did. Like, it was a little bit like melodramatic for me.
I feel like it's because it was like a complete breaking of her like philosophy that
her worldview was shattered.
Yeah.
So the thing is, I'm like,
but from one conversation, you're gonna have your entire worldview shattered. Like, come on. And she's had so many debates. She's been against people her whole life with people trying to attack her worldview, and now somehow
that's really what's difficult about this moment is that I think that discussion. I mean, a couple things. So I think you could argue part of her like emotions and her being thrown off is because she was, staying up all night and she was tired and things like that. But I also think that some of it felt like intro to philosophy. Like, what is it called? The trolley problem of like, but if there's one person on this track and 5 over here, what do you do? What if you know the one person? Like that. What's the greater good sort of thing there? And it's, of course, a little more nuanced in this than just that simple scenario. But you're like, yeah, Yasna would have definitely, I feel like, gone up against these thoughts. She wouldn't have gone up against a god who knows her past, but people have been attacking her personally for so long. So I think that was a hard thing to just ever execute. I think where we leave off with it, I'm not opposed to what I think everybody here is saying about we need that growth and for there to be a starting place for her. And I agree too, though, Roger, with what you're saying, that maybe it's almost like a false sense of bravado because we don't know too much about the whole she was locked up as a child, what that did to her, and this sort of armor that has covered her through her intelligence for most of her life. And even I would say how she is constantly put together and her makeup is perfect. And I did like Renara noticing that she was not as perfectly put together as usual, because I feel like that is a subtle representation of how she usually kind of arms herself. But the part, Sophia, what you were talking about, so I think I've just never loved the wording of that part of her teaching the lesson to Shallan. I agree that it wasn't even about reprimanding or justice for that incident, but more so just like, I'm going to be very flippant with the lives of these whatevers because I'm trying to teach my mentee something. But if I'm remembering correctly, in that scene, she purposefully allows her wealth to be seen, and then those men attack her. And I'm almost positive she even says, from like the accounts of previous attacks, they probably would have done more than just steal from me. Meaning those were probably some pretty vile people. Yeah. And Shallan has this like, but you tempted them into it. And I just have never liked that language that was used there because I'm kind of like, it's a little like victim blamey because she was attacked in that moment. Like, yeah, she knew, but also a lot of other people were, I mean, again, it's just like the wording of it has always kind of not been one of my favorite moments in Cosmere, in Stormlight Archive, and I think how Shallan views it too has always irked me a little bit. So to have it brought up as this like great flaw of Yasna's character in this moment, I was like, I didn't want you to come back to this part that I feel like wasn't maybe the best representation of some pretty complex themes. And I think that's the hard part about Yasna, because we don't spend that much time with her, and there is the potential for really digging into really interesting debates with her character, kind of like the whole law, the letter of the law versus the spirit of the law thing. With Yasna, it's like there's so much that we could dig into, but because we don't have the time, we sort of just remain somewhat surface level, and it can result in some interpretations of the wording that you're like, wait, though, I didn't like that. You didn't expand on it. So I think to come back to it almost felt like reiterating that Yasna was 100% in the wrong. So I've always felt like, I don't know. I think that's just like a moment one of my least favorite moments in the Stormlight archive, actually. And so I think to have it brought up again as a fault of Yasna's, I was like, I mean, you know.
I think the
Yeah.
purpose was to show that, you know, she's okay with sacrificing other people, but not her own family. That was like the point that Taravangian really wanted to drive home. Like, your whole philosophy is flawed because you aren't willing to sacrifice everything.
The greater
And I think
good.
that was accomplished really well by him bringing up Elikar's wife and how she always said, like, oh, I'll assassinate her if need be. Like, to me, that was way more significant in showing that Yasna doesn't always, or what she said at the beginning of this whole situation of like, well, sometimes you have to think for yourself. And I feel like that accomplished it. I don't know if bringing up, like, I like the idea. I think, Jesse, you were saying this, the idea that what was happening before is now playing a role that you couldn't have foreseen. Sorry if that wasn't you, but I like, was it Sophia? Okay,
Yeah.
sorry, Sophia. I like that concept a lot. So I'm totally in agreement with that. I feel like that message that it was, you know, I don't know that we need to keep spending time on it because I think
I think the only thing that
I-
bothered. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, Jesse. I was just
No,
gonna
go
say,
ahead.
like, the thing that bothered me about that. I mean, you're right. The victim blaming aspect of it from Shallan's side is I didn't like that either. But it's just the fact that essentially Yasna went out with the intention of murdering some people, and then she did murder some people, and nothing happened to her as a result of that. Like, she was never, you know, she was never even told off for it. Like, no one ever
Maybe say
even
a
like
word.
confronted
this
her
is-
about it.
revealing some darkness in me because I'm like, if I knew that some people were like attacking like
Yeah, but
women
you
in
wouldn't
the
go out and
street,
mur them. You'd like,
I don't know because
It feels
I'm
like
like,
vigilante justice almost, though.
I think the thing is, like,
Sarah's
even
enjoying
then,
this.
Yasna was powerful enough that she could have just captured them and brought them to justice, but instead she took matters
Yeah.
into her own hands in not even her own city,
Yeah, that's
and
true.
then never saw any fallout for it. So I was actually really glad. Like, yeah, I didn't love that it was Taravangian that did the well, Todium specifically,
Yeah.
that was doing the calling out. Taravangian, yeah, fair enough. It was his city, and she kind of went and did that in his city, so she shouldn't have.
I think
And
it
so
would have been
that's
more.
what I liked about it, was like, finally you're seeing the consequences of your actions here.
Mm.
Yeah, and I think it would have been more compelling if it was made clear to us that Yasna is one to, she has to try to work within whatever like the laws are of the world or something like that. And for that instant, she decided she didn't care or something. I feel like that would have been more compelling to me, just because in this world where people have like slaves and nobody cares, and you have a lot of people basically in poverty and they're dark-eyed and we don't care about them at all. Who cares what happens? And I don't know. I just was like, was Yasna killing some people that attacked her like really the greatest flaw of her? But I get what you're saying too, that she's always done whatever she's wanted. She's not really ever faced consequences for it. So to face those now, I like that callback in that sense. I just have never loved the way that the sort of messaging was there with that. But again, I think it's very much a matter of just because we didn't have that ever be a thing that we really debated and settled on. And also, for as much as Shallan is like more of a quote unquote thinker than some of the other characters, some of her takes aren't great. I'm pretty sure she's even thought like Yasna wearing makeup is her like tempting people or something, and I'm just like, what? Like, I remember in Words of Radiance when she's like derping around being like, stick, be fire, you know, whatever, she like randomly has this thought, and I was like, what? It's one of the only times that I've really been like, Shallan, what are you talking about? So I think that Shallan being the person to perceive Yasna's actions was maybe part of why my frustrations bloomed as a result of that moment, when in actuality, like you're saying, I think the bigger takeaway is that Yasna's always been able to do whatever she wants. If that means she's going to kill some people, like she's set on going to kill people to like just teach her her mentee lesson, then, you know, that's a little much. But Sarah,
Yeah, but the
did
way
you
we're
actually-
going to do it is just with like a philosophical argument, like, oh, well, did you know that you don't always do things for the greater good? Like, come on.
The amount of times the word "the greater good" was mentioned, though. Like, has anyone
A
seen
lot.
Hot Fuzz?
No.
I think
No,
so.
no one has seen Hot Fuzz. And
I
they're
don't
just the
remember.
greater good, and they're like, I don't want to spoil the movie. It's a fantastic comedy. Go watch it. But there's a lot of the greater good. So
Okay.
if anyone has seen it, they'll
That's
laugh
all
in
you
the
could think
comments
about.
there. Yes, that was all I could think about the entire time. Like,
Sarah,
stop
you were
saying the greater good.
laughing. You were laughing quite a bit. Did you have anything to add?
No, I was
Okay.
just when you were saying that, like, you don't know if you like.
Go out and murder people.
Like,
I'm like, okay, you know,
I'm picturing Elle as like a
This is all a
vigilante roaming the
just-
streets of Arizona.
there are some really terrible people, you know, and like the idea, the debate about like, is it the greater good to get rid of them? I feel like,
That needs to be your new name now, Al. It needs to be Vig L Auntie.
oh, yeah.
Yes.
It gets
But-
into very like psychopathy territory, you know, where it's like, you know, punishing people based on intent.
That's a good way to put it too. If she hadn't been attacked, though, because she was actually attacked, right? If I'm remembering correctly, in Way of Kings.
So long ago, I don't remember.
I'm
Yes.
pretty sure she was. It's not that
Yes.
she was like, I think those guys, but you might be right that she assumed their intent was to do more than just steal.
Mhm.
So I think you're right about that. Somebody will be like, actually, and then they can let us know.
I think they
Um,
only started to attack. I don't think they actually carried
Did
out
anything.
the attack because she
Yeah.
was already like, okay,
You're smoke.
Can I just say, I don't feel like we get enough of Yasna's powers. Because it was funny because this is another thing I was bringing up to Sean. I was like, we don't get enough of her powers. And he's like, what are her powers again? What can she do? And I was like, I don't know. I feel like I don't fully know Yasna's powers because we haven't really seen them in action the way we have so many other people's. She always feels like almost I was gonna say like the Levi in Attack on Titan, where you're like, we need to find a reason that Levi can't be here, otherwise he's gonna save the day, basically. And it kind of feels like that with Yasna. Like we always need to find a reason Yasna can't be in the picture because she's so powerful. And I feel like the whole idea of bringing her down a peg, it did have to happen, I feel like, in this way, because she apparently is so competent with her powers and her bond with her friend, and she's sworn ideals before other people. But I'm like, but I don't feel like I fully know what she can do, and I want to see it a little bit more. Am I alone in that?
I think he's
No.
saving it for the back half, is my sense.
But what if it could have helped things? You know?
Well, I feel like if we had built her up more, it would have been more impactful seeing her crack. But we barely ever see her. And when she shows up, she is just the wise mentor wizard. So I don't feel any impact from her being confronted about her worldview, because I'm like, well, we barely know her. And we know what she's presented to the world, but like we don't know her.
Yeah, we have kind of I'll get into the more specifics here, but just because you brought that up, aspects of her arc reminded me of Sazed. However, to your point, Roger, I cared way more about what happens with Sazed because you feel like you spend time with that character a lot more. But yeah, I think Yasna is one of those that we're gonna get way more later, and there's only so much time, right? But because you've used wording about her as being like this wise, wizard mentor type, what were all of your thoughts on essentially getting God perspectives in this book? Because I go back and forth. I feel like the intention is to show the way that the shards corrupt, and thus they almost become like very narrow-minded in their thinking based off of whatever the shards are compelling them to do. But simultaneously, I kind of like gods remaining a mystery, because trying to capture gods in a story, at some point you're like, they're kind of dumb. So dumb in the way like people are. And I think that's part of the point, is they were people who have been impacted by the shards. That's kind of the point. But also I'm like, but I like when they remain mysterious and like these forces almost that you just can't really comprehend, which is why I think I have mixed feelings about Dalinar's I Understand You, because I'm like, but I kind of like when they remain something that is incomprehensible, but also that just goes to show how powerful Dalinar's comprehension has gotten, that he does understand. I don't know. I feel mixed about it. So what are our thoughts on this? Sarah, what do you think of getting God perspectives?
For me, I was like so focused on every single word that they were saying because I was like, I feel like this is all important. And then I guess kind of none of it really stuck out to me because I didn't feel like it was super important for that moment. So I was like, okay, I was focusing on all the details, but I didn't really like zoom out and see the greater picture of it all. So I guess I feel kind of conflicted about seeing those also because I agree with you that I kind of wish they stayed a little bit more mysterious, at least for now. But I don't know. How
Do you feel like they really supplied us with the answers that we were set up to want within this book? Like they kept kind of setting up, don't let the Stormfaller doesn't want us to see, he doesn't want us to see, and then you're kind of feeling like, well, then what did he do? And then you get it. Do you feel like it was as satisfying, that it was satisfying to be shown finally, or do you feel like, oh, I guess that was it? How do you fall within that?
For me, I don't think it was that satisfying.
It's plain and simple. Christy, what did you think in regards to this?
Oh, you know what I think. But I hated those chapters. First of all, because I read physically and just font-wise, it was so difficult to read those.
Oh.
I hated it.
I will say small caps is used. I am with you. I just want to add, I'm with you with the amount of like ellipses and the amount of emphasized words that are not necessarily like special Cosmere words or something, like just italics because people are like, and then we went to, like that kind of, I'm with you on all those things. Small caps, I feel like is standard use, but it is hard on the eyes. So I understand that. I just want to say, I'm like, I don't think that was a bad decision. It's just kind of difficult to get around. Sorry.
I just feel like every time it was that chapter, I was like, oh, I have to deal with this again.
What was in small caps?
All of the God perspectives. I'll show you. I'll pull it up. Sorry.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Christy.
Maybe those, I should have listened to those chapters on audio because then maybe it would have give it more, gravitas.
It's probably just going to look like words.
Yeah, it does just look like words.
Yeah, sorry. Well, they're small. Everything is capitalized, but it's small caps.
And okay, anyway, we're not debating about the typeface of the book. But I also feel like that, you pull back the curtain and then you see like what they really are, and you take away all of the mystery. And then I feel like also, I don't know if it's just Sanderson's writing style as well, but when you get those perspectives and you see how they are, they just feel a little bit silly to me. And the way they interact, like Honor and Odium, like, I don't know, their fighting just feels so petty. And then in the end, when, Tanavas, he gets discarded from Honor and he's like lying on the ground and Ray stands over him and he's just like, idiot. I'm like, what is this? It feels like it's not as epic as I would have thought.
Like schoolyard bully.
Yeah.
The kid that's like, I don't want to take the high road. I want to fight back. I understand that. I think that that's that's going to be so different from person to person as to whether or not they feel like the conclusion of what we got and the reveals we got, whether it was worth it to have that mystery no longer present, as far as the mystery of just like the gods and the way they think and act and things like that. Roger, what do you think? Because I know you like lore a lot.
See, I love those bits.
Okay.
Because I also think it's an interesting twist on how gods are done. Because I read a lot of Gods Among Us tropey type books, and so having it be this conflict between the person and the ideal of the power that they're supposed to be embodying, I think is really interesting, and we can do a lot with it. I think the one thing that I didn't love was Todium wiping out Kharbranth, but then not really, because he really just squirreled them away somewhere in the spiritual realm. Because I thought that was a really interesting, like Taravangian did everything to save Kharbranth, and then Odium's power kind of overtaking him and getting him to destroy it, I thought was really fascinating. And then we kind of pulled the punch on that, and I was like, that was kind of like a wah. Like, come on, that was like the crazy God shard power that makes him so passionate and emotional made him do something, and then him maybe reflecting on that and regretting it later. I thought it would have been really fascinating, and I'm like, oh, or not, I guess. I mean, we can just pull that punch. But all the other ones, like Cultivation and Honor, who were really in love before they took up aspects of Ad Nauseam and having their cute little like magical math world where they're making Spren. I thought it was really fun and really cool. So I enjoyed that, and I think that there's enough mystery left because we don't know the personalities of the other people. We know Cultivation's a freaking dragon, so like what else is going to be there with her? Like, I think it opened up plenty of mystery left, but I don't feel like we are 100% like wizard behind the curtain, like Wizard of Oz style. I think that there's still a lot of question of like what balance of different people met with their shards that they're trying to embody. What ways are they going to be able to get the power to do what they want it to do? Because I feel like that's what Dalinar was struggling with like Honor being like, well, we have to do it because technically we said we would, and that's the honorable. Like, I think that's plenty there to play with, like mentally speaking, that I'm not like disappointed or like, ugh, now there's no mystery left. I still think it's really interesting.
I think the concept is really interesting, and I'm interested in like how that is explored, but the execution in the writing was disappointing.
Girl, you just need to go on to audiobook. If you're this picky about typeface, just be an audio reader. Set yourself free.
It's not the typeface.
Set yourself free.
The content of how they acted and such things. But I think a happy middle ground for me between what both of you are saying is that, similar to everything with the heralds, I simultaneously felt like I got too much and not enough. So I think that combines what both of you are saying. Like, Roger, you were saying, well, I think we got enough to like have certain things interested, but I still feel like there's mysteries. And then, you know, Christy, you're like, well, I feel like all the allure is gone because we're like, look at it, they're just like schoolyard kids, you know. And it's like, well, maybe if we'd had a longer understanding in history, I would care more, and then the progression of the way that the shards corrupt would be more devastating. But you're kind of getting like the montage of like, and then this world died, and then I wanted to fight him, and I was like, no, don't fight him. And then I fought him, and it killed a bunch of people, and I was like, oh no, you know, like you're kind of going through things quick, but they're gods, so you expect it to be this whirlwind of emotions and thoughts and memories. But it's a weird feeling of being both, okay, cool, I'm getting answers, but I don't know if I'm as invested. And
But I think the difference for me, I think, is that I know that we're going to get more with the gods, and we know that he's going to go back and write Dragonsteel. We know that we're going to get what happened when Ad Nauseam was shattered. We know that we're going to get what these people were before they became gods. So I think I'm more willing to forgive it. Like with the heralds, I'm kind of like, is this all we're ever going to get? Because like we got their flashbacks, and like I'm like, is this the history and is that it? Like,
yeah, heralds, I think
I know it's coming. The heralds, it's like I can hope.
What I'm describing with this whole situation, I think, is more applicable to the herald. So I agree with you there, because man, I just felt like I didn't ever have enough to care about anything that happened to them. I'm like, which one's this again? And what are their names? Like, I don't know that I even know who's who. And there's like the one that like kind of gives Kaladin a look before they join. And I'm like, what's up with that one? What was that? You know, I don't know. And so I will say though, while I agree with you that I think we're going to get more history, or maybe we won't, I don't know. But I do think there are some authors who write things in a brief way and in a very impactful way, and I think they could have potentially made me care about those perspectives more, perhaps. Whereas with Sanderson, it was like with how he wrote it, it was sort of like these big reveals, these revelations, and Dalinar kind of, it's hard to capture because you imagine that Dalinar's not just getting those things. You're kind of just, you're given certain moments that matter, but you imagine Dalinar's kind of seeing it all, almost all at the same time. He's getting this whole history, and it's condensed for us, the reader, which I like that feeling of like, you can't really capture it all. But I do think certain authors can write like 2 pages and make me devastated. And I think brevity is not necessarily Sanderson's thing. So he usually needs way more time to be able to pull that out of us, which I don't blame.
I also think it's clear that that wasn't the point. The point was the heralds kind of as a backdrop to give you a vehicle for information for broader Cosmere, which is
Right.
obviously going to have people's mileage vary. Like, it didn't feel like we were there to feel for the heralds or understand them. They were just kind of vehicles of
Well,
information.
I might disagree a little. I felt like I was supposed to care a little bit more about Nail's breakdown, and I didn't. And I felt like with Ishar, maybe not that I disagree entirely with, like, I agree that they feel like things that will come later, they're vehicles for information, but it seemed like he put enough there, like showing Nail weeping and his relative that I think understand is the Makabaki race, kind of, they came from them. And so, like, obviously he's been through tremendous pain, except for we just barely know that. So when he's crying, it was very much like, whoa, what's this guy doing? Why is he crying all of a sudden? Like, that's kind of the feeling when someone just breaks down for no reason. You're like, they're there. That's kind of like the fact they like wrap a blanket around him. I was like, okay, that is kind of funny a little bit to me, because it's like, okay, let's come along.
I will say his breakdown in the book, like in the audiobook, was I even wrote that down. Like, the narration made it, I think, a lot better. The hearing of the crying.
I mean,
Like,
I listened
he hit
to
that,
it.
though. I loved
listened-
that part.
I
just thought it was narrated.
Audiobooks. I like that audiobooks like enhance the experience, but I don't think like you should rely on an audiobook to like give you that feeling. Like, if you can't get that feeling through reading the text, then I don't think it's done well.
Mhm.
I don't remember the blanket, so obviously it wasn't impactful to me either, because I have no memory of this place. I'm like, yeah, sure, the blanket.
It was
The
the cloak.
blanket.
Well,
I remember the
anyway,
fight. I remember him trying to get him to cry, but I don't remember what happened after that. Like, the rest of it is just like,
trying to get someone to cry to win the fight is really funny to me. I was gonna make, yeah, I'll just stop. I'll yeah, let's talk about Kaladin and Seth, since they're both kind of tied together. I sadly think that what I was describing of the heralds and feeling like I was maybe meant to care more, I initially was really liking Zeth's flashbacks, and I always liked the flashbacks. And certainly I felt like there was more with him than the heralds or the gods as far as emotional stakes. It also provided us with more context, but I didn't really find that I fully felt like I understood everything transpiring within Zeth's perspective. I always felt like the plot was a little bit ahead of where I was, which, again, I feel was almost a way similar to what I said about how Dalinar is experiencing so much all at once, and that's a hard thing to capture. I think with Szeth, the way that the flashbacks are somewhat him revealing to Kaladin, and Kaladin's still kind of in the dark even when he's being given information. I like that it allows you to feel like Kaladin in that moment. But I'm like, yeah, but I want to know what happened. It's flashbacks. You can just show me, like, I guess I want a little bit more so that I understand a bit why certain things matter the way they do. I don't want to act as though there was no context, because there certainly was. It was the whole point. But there was some withholding of information so that reveals were a little bit more impactful, I think. And or that reveals were more shocking, I should say. Maybe not so much impactful, but I liked Szeth and Kaladin's plot. It was interesting. It was so off to the side, though, and I didn't care about the heralds. And Kaladin was kind of derpy in this book, so I don't know. I feel mixed on the Kaladin Szeth stuff. I feel like I had potential to be the most moving, depressing, heroic thing in the story, and then it kind of just remained one note for me, I would say, for the most part. And I'm curious how everybody else felt about it. Sophia, why don't you kick this one off?
Yeah, I liked the flashbacks. I was really interested to see what Szeth's past was and how he got to where he was at the beginning of book one. And so I'm really glad that we got that, and it was, because it was basically, it was chronological, right? His flashbacks were kind of in order, which I don't think is always the case in the flashbacks that we've had previously.
Yeah.
So I liked that it was chronological, because I felt like it was easier to follow narratively, and I was glad of that, because I think it was quite complicated because we didn't really know much about the Shin either. So it was kind of we were doing both at the same time, which I really appreciated. And I just really enjoyed seeing where Kaladin is, like, mentally and emotionally at this point, because I think just like we really saw Adolin go through it in this book, we really saw Kaladin go through it in Rhythm of War. So in this one, he's kind of starting to find this kind of place of equilibrium, which I really enjoyed, and he still has stuff to figure out. And I guess he now has plenty of time and space to do that figuring out. I also find it so interesting that at the end of this book, we actually, for once, and I don't think that this has happened in the Cosmere before, we have more information than a lot of the characters do, like in terms of where Kaladin has ended up. Really, he and we are the only ones that know that. Everybody else, I mean, presumably just presumes that he's died. And ditto with the decisions that Dalinar made and what the kind of consequences of that are going to be. We know way more about that than anyone else. So I think that that's a really interesting place that we've been put in terms of moving forward, not just in Stormlight, but in the Cosmere in general. So it almost puts us a little bit on level with Hoyd in some ways, which is a really interesting perspective to me. And I think we see the biggest part of that in Kaladin and what's happened with him. And just to go back to the gods thing, I actually really liked the gods' perspectives, and I liked the humanizing of them. And I think that that's kind of the point. The fact that they behave a little bit like children sometimes is, to me, that's the point, because they're not really gods. They're just humans that have taken on these powers that are just like way more than they could or should be able to handle. And so they're actually not handling them, they're being handled by these powers. And I really like that kind of exploration as well.
A lot of what you were describing is, I think, why this book so much feels more like a middle book to me, because of how much we leave so much up to, like, oh, now you know a lot, so what are we going to do from there? And that is a little different than how I feel usually endings leave us. So Kaladin Szeth, what other thoughts does everyone have in regards to their perspectives? Sarah, what did you think?
So I actually really liked Seth's flashbacks. I thought his story was like so depressing, and just like the way that he grew up. And like in the beginning, I was really like, that was the part that was making me the most emotional, because I was like, he just wants to like live with his sheep. Like, just let him have his sheep. So in the beginning, I was like, okay, I'm really enjoying this. But as we were going forward, I was kind of like getting confused. Like, I would be like reading something and I'd be like, is this happening now or is this happening in the past? Because there were a lot of the same places that they were going to, and I was like, I can't keep this all straight. So, and I was also kind of confused, like, what was he doing in the past? What is he doing now? Why are we doing all of those things? So that really wasn't...
Do you think that there might have been flashback pieces that were cut? Because sometimes it would jump pretty far ahead from where the previous flashback had been.
Yeah. I don't know. I was just like, it stopped connecting with me at a certain point, because I was like, okay, I don't really care what's going on anymore. And like,
sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
I was gonna say, it almost feels like we kind of would fast forward certain things so that where he was going in present day would match where he was in the past.
Yeah.
But it kind of resulted in feeling like what I was just describing, like we kind of jumped from him as a kid, this thing happened, now he's off here leading this charge, if you will, right? Like, oh, going to rescue people on the boat and things, like where you're like, oh, that was a pretty big jump from he's joined the barracks and then now he's here kind of feeling.
Yeah.
Maybe that was part of it.
Yeah, I think so. Because it was a pretty big jump of when like he was a kid to like a full adult. But yeah, I think I just kind of got lost with what they were trying to do, and that kind of lessened any sort of impact that whole plotline had for me.
There was the element too of he had the one character that had evidently been somewhat of a mentor to him, and he still struggled at the idea of having like, oh, well, I have to fight him, and then you don't really get that much though. So it'd be like if you never really saw that much of, not that this is a mentor, I just mean as far as like understanding more so. If you'd just kind of been told like, and then this guy made my brother and me go to war, basically, you'd be like, oh, okay, well that sucks, but like who's Roshone again? You know, like there's less of a genuine, oh my gosh, I can't believe he has to fight this person. Or I mean, I felt that a little more obviously with like his dad and his sister, but some of the other characters, I don't know that I felt too much when it came to Szeth's connection to them and I have to fight this person. No, but I think genuinely this person cared about the truth. You know, I just kind of was like, I don't have enough time, I think, in Szeth's past to really fully see, like you see in Way of Kings why Kaladin feels the way he does. And I think with this, it's like you get enough pieces for context and enough to care at least a little. I just don't know that I was coming away from things as devastated because the whole confrontation between his sister and his father and knowing that they're in this pain for so long in present day, that could have just been so emotionally devastating. And it wasn't that I felt nothing. It's just maybe I feel if we'd had more time to expand on Szeth's chapters, we could have had that a little bit more, perhaps.
Well, so now that I'm thinking about it, I remember it took like 200 pages or something to even get a flashback chapter. And at least from what I recall from like The Way of Kings, I feel like we were getting flashbacks way sooner than that.
Yeah.
And like that one had the most flashbacks, and we've like kind of been steadily decreasing throughout the books of like having less and less flashbacks.
Yeah, because the Venli, it was Venli, right? That
Yeah.
in the previous where it was barely there. So it was kind of like, oh, I guess we're seeing her backstory, which we haven't even talked about like Venli, Sigil, Navani, which we'll like touch on, not as much as we've been touching on everything else. But yeah, I think that's a good thing to point out is it took so long to get there. And I think this is why when we first started, I was saying currently I feel like we could cut some stuff to add to other places. And I think this is a place where I would have liked it expanded a bit. Roger, what do you think?
I didn't have any problems with the flashbacks. I thought that they were reasonably impactful. I think a lot of people, including myself, can relate to the fact of like thinking that you have this perfect family unit, and like it definitely was not as developed on page. It was left a lot for you to connect to it, and so I can definitely see where in previous books you got to see more time of the quiet moments to have that hit harder from what was directly on page, and he didn't do that as much. For me, I think the bigger issue is that this plotline in particular definitely leaned the most into the kind of Guardians of the Galaxy campy type feel, where we had the most kind of interjections of humor a little bit, and also we introduced some of the darkest things that never really went anywhere, like Szeth being like, thank you so much, I now feel okay that I can kill myself when this is over, and we never really did anything with that. We never really, in a meaningful way, I felt, had him confront that, like, no, I actually really want to live. And we got the glimpse of like, okay, well, he's obviously going to be fine because he writes this book in the future and has a wife that we haven't met. So like, that was kind of like a little bit spoilery to me. And it kind of took away, I'm like, well, obviously he's going to be fine because he's going to have a wife. So like, and he's going to write this book. So I think that there's a little bit of undermining of stakes that I kind of hate when it happens. And it's happened in other books before, where it feels like right when you're getting to the dramatic, most intense moment, they do something that lets you know that like the stakes aren't really what you think they are. And I'm like, okay, well, that's kind of like lame. Like it kind of pulls the punch in a way that I didn't really love. And I would have really liked him to feel, and we got a little bit of it when he was confronting his family and not wanting to fight and deciding that his new path forward is going to be to not fight. But like, it never really felt like we circled back to like, okay, but he was really like going to commit suicide. And like, it was real dark. And then it was like, not at all.
It was almost dark for the sake of Kaladin trying to piece together what he's supposed to do.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So it's more of like, isn't it funny? Kaladin's like, oh geez, no, not that. And versus like Kaladin on the edge about to jump and still brings him the leap. You know, I feel like the two weren't quite. I will say I think Szeth feels less, I don't want to say less depressed necessarily, but his seems more of like he feels this is what should happen because he deserves it, because this is like the brainwashing he's been taught. Like, I deserve to die. So I think now I will let myself, you know, which is different than I don't want to live anymore. Life sucks and I can't do it. You know, I feel like there are differences certainly, but
But I feel like it's very similar to how Yasna's thing went, where I feel like we just kind of have these huge moments that happen like really quickly, where it's okay, her foundation of her, the way she sees her world has been attacked for her entire life.
Yeah.
That's been very well established, that everybody makes fun of her for being a heretic, this, that, and the other thing. And one conversation is going to completely shatter her worldview now. And like Szeth, okay, my entire life I've been trained that I'm this weapon. I am just a force for other people. Never mind, I'm just going to live for myself now, and I'm going to, like, not fight anymore. And, like, goodbye, Spren. And, like, his friend was a douche, so, like, I really enjoyed when he sent 12124, whatever the hell his name was, off into the ether. But, like, it just felt like we kind of pulled our punches a little bit, because we set it up to be like, oh, ooh, we got real dark here, Mr. Sanderson. And then it's like, oh, never mind.
Yeah, I
Okay.
think undermining of stakes was a really good way to put that. Christy, what do you think?
So I really love Szeth's backstory and flashbacks. This, like I mentioned in our last chat, like Szeth was always just like a nothing character to me before, but this book made him one of my favorites in this series. I will say though that the reveal of what the voice was kind of underwhelming. It was like, oh, first it was the Unmade, and I was like, okay, probably should have seen that coming. That's kind of obvious. And then it turned out to be Ishar, and I'm like, okay, I guess. Like, I don't really know if this means anything to me. Like, this doesn't affect my perception of anything in any way. It doesn't change anything for me. But I still really love Szeth. But you describing Kaladin as being really derpy in this book is 100% accurate. Okay, so another unpopular opinion from me is I've never been like the biggest fan of Kaladin. Like, I think he's a great character. You know, he has a compelling story, but I just never felt as much of a connection to him as I think like pretty much 99% of people who read this series do. So him being there in this book was also kind of felt like not really anything to me. It just kind of felt like a way for him to get to the end so that he can become a herald.
Well, he became therapy man. I was joking with Al when she was talking to me about her feelings. He basically was in like a superhero outfit with like a big T, and I'm here to give you therapy. That was like his whole arc in this book.
Yeah. So I don't know. I feel like just all the emotional impact and emotional stakes were not there in this book, and I think this is just like one of the
you know, with Kaladin, I feel like, you know how sometimes people will say, well, the villains are always more interesting, like the goody two shoes character is boring. That idea, I almost feel like something similar happened with Kaladin, which is that when he's real depressed is when he's the most interesting, and when he's happy, it's like there's not a whole lot there. Almost like, you know what I'm saying? Like, almost like we abandon introspection when he's not dwelling. And I think there's a difference between introspection and dwelling. He used to dwell, and now that because he does have moments where he's like, I can feel myself going into a bad headspace, and I know that things will get better. I just need to push through this. You know, he has those positive ways of thinking through things, but then he's very much, and I think this is a good thing. He's thinking outside of himself. He's trying to think about Szeth and then eventually Nail and the others. But I do feel like when we have some kind of deep depression or trauma, that's a really good catalyst for Sanderson to do some very great character work. But once that work's been done, almost feels like there's not as much to do with the character. And I think that people that are in healthy places can also be interesting, you know, and maybe that's just, we didn't have time really for Kaladin to be, I suppose in a sense, it caught us off guard then to have Kaladin become a herald because we didn't realize that he like all this felt like setup for him to be a therapy man, as Roger calls him, with the heralds now that he has become one himself. But I don't feel like we got our deep connection to Kaladin that so many of us, I think, fell in love with, except for Christy, throughout the rest of the series.
Yeah.
Sarah and I feel like, as you were saying that, it's like powers unite. Oh no, he's great.
Background character in this book. But I will say, best part about Kaladin and Zeth's perspective was Nightblood. I love the ending with Nightblood.
I will say I felt a little bad for 12124 because
I love 12124.
he eventually was like, I do kind of want to be better, and Kaladin's like, well then be better, man. What the heck? And then
Be better.
and then Zeth is sending him away. I kind of dug that Zeth reached the ideal and then immediately ditched it. But then that took away a little bit from, because Dalinar basically did the same thing, right? So then I was like, oh, okay, same vibe here. All right.
Same
There was just a
vibe.
lot of moments where we were going to have the epic fight that we didn't. We pivoted away from it. Zeth
Yeah.
got the 5th ideal. We were going to go epic, have him fight. Never mind. We had Dalinar
Okay.
ascend to honor. We're going to have the big epic. Oh, never mind. It might destroy the planet, so we can't do that. So he's just going to ditch it. There was a lot of like edging, if you will, that I did non-consensual.
Non-consensual.
I-
I love that. I felt that way too, Roger.
I know not everybody's had a chance to talk through their thoughts with this, and I know we've been chatting for a long time. Before we move on, Jesse, Sophia, did you want to add thoughts to this?
So my only thought that I really feel like I need to add is: has anyone else seen Judge Dredd?
No.
No. The I am the law. Someone will get it.
Oh.
The ideal is Judge Dredd. And I was like, that I don't know why it kind of took me out. And like you have to read it in Sylvester Stallone's voice. I am.
I
the
like
law.
you bringing the movie references that the rest of us are like, what
no
are
one's
movies?
seen Judge Dredd. It's a really like campy, terrible. It's not a good movie.
Oh, okay. Sophia, did you have something to add to this portion of the chat?
She loves Kaladin.
I love Kaladin. I already said what I want to say.
We have the direct opposite opinions. Like, 'cause I like
Yeah, we do.
Just those two over off to the side.
Yeah.
So because we talked about, okay, there'd be these big moments, and we'd be like, oh, just kidding, not so much that. I want to talk about the Gavinor reveal, and I want to talk about Shallan's mom. So a little bit. Maybe it's just because collectively the fandom pieced a lot of these things as options together, but I want to be very clear. I by no means think this is literally what happened. It almost felt though that Sanderson was like, darn it, they figured it out. All right, well, I won't spend that much time on it then because the Gavinor thing happens and it's like, oh, Jesus, Gavinor. And then it's like freeze. And then Dalinar's like, I can't do this. And then it's kind of over. And you're like, oh, okay, well, yeah, that worked out. And then with Shallan, it's like, that was my mom. She was at my wedding, which kind of, Sophia, you told us that was a little bit revealed based off of the ball that was at the convention, but also for years I've been like, wait, what? We didn't get there. I feel like something had to have happened at their wedding and he's saving that. I thought that years ago. So then for me, it was kind of, I was like, okay, let's see what happens. And she's basically like, I forgive you, Mom. And then we move on. And I was like, oh, I just feel like those reveals, not that they fell flat, but that we didn't spend that much time with them for something we've been building up to. And Roger, I think you felt that more specifically with the fight, the literal fight between Dalinar and Odium. But would you say that was in part because of what happened with Gavinor as well?
I think so, because we kept setting, it was like a lot of bait and switch. It was like, oh, it's Elhokar, it's not Elhokar, it's Gavinor, but never mind, it's not going to be a fight. It's just going to be Dalinar and Odium talking again. So, like, so I think there was a lot of it mixed in there. And I don't know if it would have been more impactful if I didn't know that Gavinor was on the table ahead of time, if I would have been like, wait, what? But it was so fast in this like 1,300 page monstrosity. It's like less than a page, I feel like, of what we actually spend doing it. So I'm like, yeah.
Speaking of people that need therapy, oh my gosh, Gavinor, I'm like, how is he ever going to be a well-adjusted human after just being forced to watch his grandpa be a bad person for 20 years and then only to be betrayed? I was like, okay, yeah, I don't know what's going to happen with him. But anyway, yeah. How does everybody else feel about some of these reveals that we got?
I feel
I
like,
do wanna-
yeah, the Shalon one kind of fell for me. Like, it was like, oh, cool. Like, it was more of a, we kind of knew it. It was cool to see, but it wasn't like, oh my God, like super interesting. The Gavin
Pattern
one
seemed
did
more
kind of get me, though.
concerned than Shalon. Pattern's like,
Yeah.
you do know we just said you're the daughter of a herald, right? She's like, yeah.
Yeah, it's cool, whatever. The Gavin one did kind of get me because I kind of expected them to go with the kid, like with kid-aged Gavinor. The fact that they're like, hey, 20 years, you're like, wait, what? Wait, what?
We
I
always
will
knew that
say-
because we knew that he had to have consent, and where there was always the question like,
That's
can a
true.
child give consent?
Yeah.
But then
I-
when Taravangian had a loophole, I was like, oh, that could be the loophole. Is
Mhm.
that he could kind of bend that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I a little bit feel like Wit should have noticed when Navani comes back and she's like, here's Gavinor, you know, and they're like, put him to bed. I feel like Wit can often see through stuff. So I
Yeah, I
feel
was
like Wit
surprised by that, too.
should have known, like the fact that he was like, JK Odium, I actually made like a fleshy mound that looks like sleeping Gavinor. I'm like, I didn't know you could do
Didn't
that
know.
though. I guess, you know, like it obviously felt real enough to her. I guess he's just really good with his illusions. It was a little I almost wish that Navani had tried and somehow Gavinor got left and you're like, oh shoot, Gavinor's still there. I almost feel like I would have, not that it's a big deal, but I just
No,
feel
but-
like Wit should have noticed.
I wonder if did we ever get what memories were taken from Wit? Maybe it has something to do with that, where he couldn't see through it. I feel like I never got a resolution.
I think it was
to,
just
like,
that
Wit
conversation.
forgetting.
I think it was just the epilogue of Rhythm of War where he's
Mhm.
like, I got you. And then Odium's like, and then he starts over and he's like, I got you. And he's like, oh, I guess you did. I think it was just that. I
Yeah.
don't know if there was
feel like
anything
it wasn't
additional.
like enough. Like I feel like it was just like, did that matter?
You know, when I think about the grand scheme of where Rhythm of War leads off and when Wit finally remembers, like, oh shoot, I have memories missing. I'm like, hasn't hardly any time passed? I feel like
Yeah.
it didn't end up impacting things too much because
Mhm.
they ended up
Well, the
How much
main
time
thing, the main thing it impacted is that it meant that for a lot of the book, they didn't know that Odium was Taravangian.
Oh, that's true.
but he didn't he not know anyway? Wasn't it Yasna who ended up telling him? Him getting
Who?
his memories back didn't Wit didn't know.
No, that's what I mean.
But did he
That
even know
He knows that he. I don't think he got his memories back particularly
Fully.
quickly per se.
I see what
But
you're
the
saying.
fact that he had memories missing at all, I think seriously hindered their ability to figure out that it was Taravangian they were dealing with now.
I see, because
So I
you're
guess
saying
my
he-
question would be, what would that have changed for them? Because even when they
Well,
knew it was
it
Taravangian, they
changes-
didn't have a great plan.
Well, it changes the way that Odium behaved because I think Hoyt or Wit mentioned like Taravangian's just a totally different character to what was his name?
Race.
Raised.
Raise.
It's too close to Mraize.
Yeah.
And
Um,
Raise.
Right.
Anyway, so the way that Taravangian is like a bit more manipulative and Ray's was a bit more like a bull in a china shop type.
Yeah,
no, I
you're
get
right,
the television
because-
is different, but I meant like as far as the sakes of this book goes, would it have mattered if they knew that it was Taravangian? Because they still, even when they figured it out, didn't have great plans to deal with Odium regardless. I guess it just made them like a little bit more panicked that they didn't know what loopholes he would figure out, but like it didn't feel like it had that much of an impact when they figured it out that it was Taravangian.
It was
didn't really
like
change the
10
course.
days versus 10 days versus 4 days of knowing it was him. Maybe if they'd had the full 10, they would have known more what to it. I almost think to what Sophia's saying, I think Wit had this understanding that previous Odium Rays would have actually been held to certain things out of almost like a code of conduct. Whereas this new version, he couldn't advise the same way, and losing 4, 5, 6 days worth of their 10, not knowing that he was dealing with someone. I see what you're saying, and he did Wit got enough memories back to be like, oh, I think I figured out the loophole has to do with these capitals, but he didn't get enough back to remember it was Taravangian.
Yeah.
A little convenient that he didn't figure it out. He only got like certain things back that made it so that we could send everybody in different places, but also not know it was. But again, I also see what you're saying, Roger, because would they really have changed their plans if it had been known it was Taravangian? I don't know if it would have too much, but I think it was one of those just like, oh shoot, what? That means that we have no idea what we're dealing with, and maybe it makes the Gavanor thing heavier, perhaps.
Well, I was going to say on the Gavanor thing, it was so hard last week for me to control my face.
Me when I was like,
You all were still predicting the Gavanor stuff, and I was just like, let me play with my dragon.
Okay, I feel like I officially have to mention a few Cosmere spoiler things because we're coming up. We're at 2 hours, right? I feel like we gotta just.
I think
jump
we're
in.
yeah.
Okay, a few things. Everybody, just reminder: Cosmere spoilers now. I'm specifically going to be talking about Mistborn more than anything, so I want to talk about some parallels between Mistborn and Stormlight Archive. The fake out, like it's Elhokar, and then you go to some other people and you're like, just kidding, it's Gavanor, was so similar to me. With Vin, it's like, it's her brother, and you're like, just kidding, it's not. And to me, it was like, I knew immediately. I was like, it's not Elhokar. Can we just get to the part where it's Gavanor? Like, I know that it's not because you've done this fake out before,
I feel
which
like that
isn't
was
fair.
obvious, no?
What?
I thought it was obvious too.
I thought it was obvious. I didn't even feel like it was supposed to be a.
There was a
oh,
point
because I was wondering like, how is Elhokar back? Like,
well, I actually would have. A little part of me was like, it'd be kind of cool if it was Elhokar. And I'll add, I feel like that actually was one of the things that made me the saddest when he kind of understands Elhokar's fear and constant paranoia in this book. Like when Dalinar finally has a better understanding, I was like, oh, it makes me feel bad for Elhokar because he was kind of annoying before, and now that you understand, he understands. Anyway, so there was that part where I was like, I mean, it's the Vin, it's her brother thing again. And then I talked about before parallels between Jasnah and Sazed. So this sort of end of Well of Ascension, Sazed's character breaking down his whole worldview. He's like, what does it even matter? And both of them kind of have a similar relationship to seeking of knowledge that is related to religion. Obviously, they're very different characters in their personalities. And Sazed's more of like, I believe in the value of these things. And Jasnah's like, if it serves civilization, like pat on the head, then okay, you can believe, but I don't because I'm so logical. You know, they're a little different in that sense. But I feel like Sazed's breakdown at the end of Well of Ascension feels like Jasnah's breakdown right now. And I'm like, you know, it's going to be years between Arc 1 and Arc 2 of Stormlight. So I don't think we're going to get like depressed Sazed Hero of Ages level of, sadness. But I do feel like that progression of them. Sophia, you're making a face. I want to know what your thoughts are.
No.
You just like, it almost looked like you're hiding your face again. So I didn't know.
I guess I didn't see that as a. I feel like Sazed and Jasnah are just so different in my mind that I didn't even think about any kind of parallel there.
Well, I think it just meant that I don't want to act as though their progression and their arcs is identical because it's not. The thing that leads Sazed to have his breakdown is very different than what leads her, but they do kind of they come to the same place of my entire worldview is now shattered and what does it even mean? And so I'll be curious to see what he does with Jasnah from here, given that we have seen this similar breakdown before, and Jasnah is such a different character that I want to see. And like I said, we're gonna get so much time from Arc 1 to Arc 2 that I'll be curious, but it did remind me of that. But it also just highlighted for me how much I liked it better when it happened to Sazed, as awful as that sounds. It's like, I liked when he had to like hold the woman he loved dead in his arms. Like, it's not
I
what
still
I
hate
mean.
Tindwyl though. I still hate
I
her.
don't.
She sucks.
I know. This is not the conversation for that. And then just the whole like, and I don't know how to avoid this because I think this is going to be, I mean, this is just part of the fact that it's the Cosmere, but the combining of shards, it's just in Mistborn, it worked out because the powers kind of balance, or did it? Because I feel like end of era 2, you're like, what's going on with Sazed? But or Harmony, right? But the combination sort of balances things, whereas here it does not. So I understand there's a difference, but it's still like a similar combination of shards. Do you think that that leads to predictions as to what's going to happen? Like, will they have to combine somehow with whatever's going on with cultivation or something in order to truly have this? Because she definitely, I feel like cultivation sort of tried to focus on like the beauty of things and the beauty of creation and things like that, as opposed to fight. And there is this sort of almost neutrality in cultivation. So is it going to be that that needs to join? Is it going to be that, I know the idea is that all the shards are now going to be focused on this, but yeah, I don't know. Anyway, so there's just some parallels to Mistborn that I wanted to mention that I feel like I couldn't during the discussion. But anyway, other people's thoughts. It can be bouncing off what I said or just other things or predictions for what's to come. Jesse, why don't you kick it off?
I feel like I got not Mistborn at all. I feel like I finally got some of those answers that bugged me when I read Stormlit Man, though. Because literally, yeah.
Sunlit.
What did I say? Did I say it wrong?
You said Stormlit.
Same.
It makes sense.
difference.
It's like when
makes-
people actually say Oathbreaker and you're like, it's Oathbringer or Warbreaker? Which one do you mean?
Both of them. But I'm pretty sure, like, the entire thing, I was like, wait, that's not the name of Sigil's Spren. Like, I was like, that's not Sigil Spren's name. What's going on? Like, I find that throughout my notes. And then by the end, when he, breaks his oath to save his original Spren, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 7, I can't remember.
1, 2, 1, 2, 4.
7, 8,
Close
9.
enough. It comes to Sigil and is like, hey, what's up? I don't like my name anymore. So you don't have to call me that. And he's like, aren't you Seth Spren? He's like, I was. Let's be better together. I mean, it
broke
still
up
leaves
with
more
me.
answers. Yeah, he broke up with me.
I definitely feel like
Funny
Sunlit Man
oddity.
came too early because I feel like that was the only reason I was kind of pseudo interested in Sigil's plotline. I was like, wait,
But
what's
yeah.
going to happen to his Spren? And then all of a sudden, I was like, oh, but was this the Spren that we're talking about? Like, is this the Spren that becomes a shell of itself? And I had to go back and check. And I was like, okay, who the hell is Ox? It has male pronouns, so it can't be his female wind Spren. So, like, what? I definitely am, like, annoyed now because I'm like, Sunlit Man should have come later. Like, that didn't... I know Elle, when she read it, was like, I feel like I'm missing context. I'm like, this just spoiled. Get out of here.
I feel
Yeah,
like
no,
I got some of my mixed context.
I felt like, in a sense, we had to include Sazed, sorry, that's just in my head now. Sigil perspectives, because it's like we have to set up for the events of Sunlit Man.
Mhm.
And obviously they seem relevant, right? He gets the Dawn Shard. I actually liked what
Yeah.
happened in like's the wrong word, but I liked
Yeah.
the execution of what happened with Sigil, an area where I didn't think I cared that much. I actually cared a little bit more. I think the Venli stuff I cared less about because I'm like, okay, who is Elle then? That's a question I still have, is like, who is Elle then? I don't know. But
I feel like
Sigil,
he's that singer leader that was negotiating with Jezrien in the flashbacks. But what I'm kind of like confused about is like, what is his significance? Like, what does it have to do with
right.
anything?
Right. That's what I mean.
Yeah,
I
no
thought he
idea.
was going to
He's
play.
significant in the back half, I think. because
Yeah.
he has this arrangement now with Odium, which is very Mormon-esque, I feel like. He's basically been promised a planet if he behaves himself, which...
Which is what
I,
makes me
um,
scared of this person's comment, because I really hope that we don't go down the monotheistic route where we just combine everything back to Adol Nauseam because having multiple gods is bad.
That's Cosmere Endgame to me. I've been saying that the whole time. Like, unite them means Adonalcium. I'm positive.
But that's so cheesy. And I guess I get it that it follows
get it.
along with his like religious beliefs, but I'm like, okay, but like having just the one god isn't necessarily the only thing that, like, I don't know. It's annoying to me, but I wouldn't be shocked.
Maybe we need to combine them all to unite them and then destroy them completely.
That's like what Wit did before, right?
Mm.
Isn't that
Well,
Wit's
then,
whole
I
thing?
suppose
Like,
that makes you like, is Adonalcium really, or was Adonalcium really a god? I don't know. Powerful being, maybe, but god? Who knows?
One thing about the shards that bugged me, and I don't know if like it's just me and I'm dumb, but so the whole thing with why Honor and Odium couldn't fight was, oh, if they fought, then it will like destroy Roshar. But then I'm like, but in Mistborn, Cosmere spoilers.
Oh yeah, I'll put that back up. I can keep this up.
In Mistborn, like Vin Preservation and AT Ruin fought, and that they could do that. And like, why could they do that? And then like there was like a convenient explanation a bit later about how oh, this has happened before, but if one power wants to preserve stuff, then it's okay. I just felt like that was like a little bit too convenient of an explanation just to like explain why Honor and Odium couldn't fight. Because like if you think about it, then wouldn't Honor, who wants to like conserve oaths and keep oaths, like wouldn't that kind of be like a preserving kind of power?
I think maybe for me the way I took it is that in Hero of Ages, everybody had to go underground because the world was being destroyed. I think in Stormlight they didn't really have time to prepare. Isn't that kind of a big thing in the series, is that their civilization is so accustomed to high storms that the Everstorms pretty much demolish everything, and their entire infrastructures aren't capable of adjusting. In Mistborn, I feel like, well, so many people die in Mistborn too. Yeah. I feel like this one was sort of like let's try to reduce the amount of human death. I guess I almost thought everything happening with Venli was going to be, not that I wanted it to, I thought it was going to play more of a role in sort of saving the day when it came to this potential god fight, but it didn't. So it kind of left me a little disappointed with the progression as far as the necessity of it within this, as Roger put it, monstrosity of a book. But yeah, I mean, I don't disagree though that it kind of felt like, oh, we can't fight though because we'll kill people. And it's been shown.
And be like, well, arguably, Ruin and Preservation, because so much of their power had been separated into different little balls and consumed by more people, maybe they had less of their overall god power. Because there's a lot of questions around, well, Honor isn't fully Honor because a shard of him fled before it became Retribution. Odium isn't fully Odium because a lot of Odium is in Ba-Edo Mishram. So I'm like, okay, but isn't there technically, they don't have full god powers either? So I'm just like a little bit confused about the levels of god power, but they can still ascend to be the shard, but they don't really have all of this. It's very,
and it's I think what's interesting is in Mistborn, that's a good thing to point out, is that it's kind of within mankind, whereas in this book it's within the Unmade and these other forces. So it did almost, you could say, reproduce differently in a sense, or get passed down differently.
I thought the issue was that Odium is just so much more dangerous of a power than any of the others. So,
but why is Passion more dangerous than Ruin? Like, if you think about just on it doesn't really make sense. I know that he's killed other shards before, and he's obviously maybe taken a part of their power when he did it. I don't know.
Yeah, that's why it just feels a little bit too convenient explanation here. We're just like, okay, I guess we'll go with it.
I mean, I'm assuming that he'll maybe circle back to it and answer it eventually, because he seems to be too scientific to leave it just this open and confusing.
I was going to say, I feel like this ties really well with the beginning of the conversation of, this is why this feels like a middle book, because we have so much going on now. And I'm like, all right, I guess. And I think with conclusions, there's more of a sense of like, oh, wow, okay. And in this, you're like, I suppose.
Well, it's the world's different. Stormlight is gone. Can they use new Warlight? Is there there's really no real satisfying. We're just paused for 10 years Roshar time and 80 years Cosmere Standard in a time bubble.
Sarah,
I really like that kind of explanation of why we have this time jump, though. I was glad to see we're not just having an arbitrary time jump. There is actually an in-world, in Cosmere reason for this.
I like that he pinned down.
Why? When did Ruin and Preservation merged? Was there a time bubble around Scadrial?
I think it was.
No, I think it has to do with the opening into the spiritual realm, right?
Yeah.
because of the way time is adjusted there. So
Mm.
Dalinar's bondsmith abilities, and then him being the person that sort of had this power, I think is part of
Yeah.
that time. I think that's part of the explanation. I'm sure we'll get more later. Sarah, I feel like we've all been talking loud. And I'm curious if you have any, Cosmere spoiler related thoughts.
My main one was the combining of the shards. I was like, okay, I'm unsurprised by this because we've seen that before. And then also kind of like, are we going towards recombining all of them?
Yeah.
I don't know how I feel about that.
What do
at
you
this point.
think, bringing back a thing I think Roger specifically was bringing up before, how do you think Ba'ato Mishram relates to Mistborn and the Ghost Bloods? And finally we can say it, Kelsier, because we're that far into the conversation. What do you guys think?
I have
No
no
ideas.
thought in my head. Like,
Well, Kelsey
no
was
thoughts on that
interested
one.
in Ba'ato Mishram, is he?
I mean, they
Ghost
wanted to
Bloods
release
are.
her.
He's like less
Her whole
interested in
mission.
Roshar now. He's like, meh.
We didn't even address this, but it's I feel like it ties to Mistborn. So Moash with the crystals. So I've been under the impression that Kelsier's goals have consistently been to seek out a way to be able to be more physically on various planets, maintaining his powers and potentially gaining powers from other systems, but being able to use those wherever he goes. And also he has this like savior complex a bit. And so I feel like he perhaps is almost the antithesis, you could say, to Hoyd, which is kind of funny because when they interact, they fight. But where Hoyd is in the background constantly manipulating things, and for his reasons, you're like, I don't totally know. I almost feel like Kelsier is becoming an opposite, maybe not necessarily a villain, but he seems to be an opposite in a sense, but with a similar goal, in my opinion, where he's like seeking power to do what he feels is justice, the greater good. But I also think he's a little selfish too. And he always seems to think it's like him that needs to do the job. So I wonder if, and we have talked about parallels between Moash and Kelsier. And I'm like, I feel like there is a form of hemalurgy with what happened. I almost also want to say that what happened with Ishar at the end felt a little bit like, what's it called when you like consume people's emotions in Mistborn? It's what Breeze does.
Soothing.
Yeah,
where it's like that form.
Yeah,
where
because
you
they
just,
soothe and riot, I think.
yes, that reminded me a little bit of that. So anyway, I just feel like there's something. I feel like Kelsier has reasons he wants to gain more power, both selfishly and then whether they're true motivations or not for the greater good. I feel like it's related in some ways. I don't know.
He's just gonna be so edgy. He's gonna have all the piercings. He's gonna go to every system and get the crystal piercing, the metal piercing, the whatever.
Well,
Mhm.
Vasher has maintained his
Right.
powers on Roshar. We never saw Vivenna in this book, right? I don't think she ever showed up.
No. But we
Yeah.
saw a lot of Asher.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
So did
and
Lift.
yeah, yeah, and I'll be
He's like,
curious to
can
see
I
what
train you?
happens.
She's like, can you put some pants on?
His butt was not one she wanted to look at. Vivenna might disagree. I feel like Vivenna wouldn't mind, but
Probably
yeah, it seems like Lift is going to play a bigger role. I'm like, can she grow up now? Oh, and Sophia, your
I'm
theory that
excited.
her and Shallan are related, is it because there's a part where it talks about how Shallan's father has an illegitimate child? Is that where?
No, I think that it came earlier, and I think it was just a throwaway comment that Lift made about her mum that just made me think, is her mum also Jenna?
Oh, okay. Well,
Oh.
okay.
I
Well, then,
can't remember exactly where it was.
do we know who Shallan's half sibling is then?
I have
'Cause
no
you
idea.
think
I
Lift
wrote that
is-
down too.
Because it sounds like from this that you would think that they would be half siblings on her mom's side. I was wondering if it's
Yeah.
half siblings on her dad's
I
side.
mean, it could be. My feeling was that they shared a mum, but
Her
could be
features are described less like Shallan's mom and Shallan, and I think more. Isn't it more traditionally? Is it more traditionally Azish or Alethi. I don't know. I don't
think
recall at
she's
this
more-
point.
Azish.
Okay.
Well,
Yeah,
she's
I don't. We don't.
described as looking Reshi, isn't she?
Oh
Yeah, I
yeah, she's
don't-
Reggie. Is it Reggie? Or
I don't take notes on this. What they look like.
not that
Yeah.
part. Yeah, but
People
like what
piece
I did
together
was like,
Shauna was
oh.
probably her mom from looking at pictures in the friggin' end papers or some nonsense. Like I can't.
I'm like,
That's where
oh,
she
red
was
hair.
From, though, the Reshi Isles. That's where she was from originally.
And what do people from the Russian Hills look like?
Yeah, that's the.
Just know that she had
Darker
long
skin, I
black
think.
Okay.
Yeah. So we had Dawn Shard stuff pop up.
That was kind of cool.
Yeah,
When he
yeah.
met with whatever, what is her name? Is it Risen? Who's
Yeah.
Chiri Chiri's
Okay.
master or whatever?
Chiri!
And you saw the Dawn Shards want to like pull back together with some crazy cosmic force, which is where I hope we're going. I hope we do something crazy with the Dawn Shards to make a new normal that's not Adonasium.
Yeah.
Oh, we're definitely
Chiri,
going to see more
chiri.
from the Dawn Shards for sure.
Yeah, I don't know. There's just so much that could happen at this point, which is why, for as much as aspects of this book, for me, were not what I was hoping for in relation to both my expectations, but also what we got with previous books. Despite that, we have established such a level of potential for what's to come. And not that this whole thing needs to turn into a conversation about what was said in the State of Sanderson, but I think a fairly long break from Stormlight will be good for everybody, for Sanderson, for the fans. And I hope that, I think I described in a previous video that from one system to the next, one series to the next, I feel like there were different tones. And I want us to maintain those tones for those series. Now, I don't mean that everything that happens in Scadrial needs to feel the same. Obviously, Mistborn Era 1 and Era 2 felt different. But I just mean within various series, I like that we could originally, Mistborn Era 1 was gritty and edgy, and Stormlight was very introspective and more slower going, but had some of the best highs because we also showed those lows. Warbreaker was kind of like fun and mystical, and I feel like I don't want to lose that. I want moving forward for us to always feel like, wow, what are we going to get with this? Because I like that variety. I don't want everything to feel like, I jokingly said before, like Wayne permeating into everything. That feeling, I don't want that within every story. I want different tones, because I don't mind saying that, yeah, Mistborn Era 2 is less my taste than Mistborn Era 1, but I'm glad both exist for everybody. I don't mind that whatsoever, but I do think I'll be a little sad if the camp factor and maybe some of the cheesier things are now going to be what's in everything. And the reason I worry that might be a potential is because of the fact that everything feels like it's going to start uniting more. So will there be that pressure to also unite in tone across the series? And I'm like, I hope not. I want to maintain.
I mean, Sunlit doesn't feel like I've literally just started my reread of Sunlit today because I didn't get time for it before.
Which is arguably probably better. Because people should read Sunlight after this book.
Yeah. And it definitely doesn't feel, and Tress and Yumi didn't really feel like that either.
I think Tress feels like whimsical.
Yeah.
Yumi does feel different. It doesn't feel serious, but it feels different, certainly.
Yeah.
I think Sunlit Man almost feels more like action adventure
Yes.
in a lot of ways. So
Yeah.
you're right that across the secret projects, they definitely felt different. And I think
it'll be interesting to see what Isles of the Emberdark feels like, because that will be the next Cosmere release that we get. So
is that the next secret project?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, sorry,
Okay.
should I have not said the title?
Oh no, the title!
Spoiled that for so
Wait,
many people.
we have Cosmere spoilers banner up.
Hey, we're good.
Yay. What do the rest of you all feel? And I like that all the stuff you just pointed out, Sophia, and I'm with you where I kind of hope we continuously have these different tones. But what does everybody else think or fear or want from everything moving forward? Roger, we'll go in order. Sophia, you just chatted, so we'll go Roger, Christy, Jesse, and then Sarah.
I think most of this book felt Stormlight-ish to me, except for Kaladin and Zeth. I felt like they got campier in the plotline that I kind of expected to be the least campy. Because I feel like Adolin feels like traditional Stormlight to me.
I agree.
So I think that there's aspects of this that still felt like Stormlight. So I don't know. I'm as worried about the tones merging. I'm more concerned that we're going to do some nonsense with monotheism is the best thing ever, and so we have to go back to the single god. But hopefully, it's more interesting than that, and that there is something more to be said there. I am just more curious because I feel like this book really just hyped me for what's to come next, and I don't feel like I got a good, solid conclusion of anything on Roshar because Roshar's transformed. Basically, everywhere is covered in darkness except for Aesir and the bubble around Urithiru. Like, I don't feel like I got any solid conclusions to anything on Roshar, but I did get a lot of interesting, cool god stuff that makes me really excited to see where it goes.
Christy, what about for you?
When I finished this book, I also did have the concern of like, what do we expect from now? Because like everybody is kind of like intertwining. You're gonna have characters from other books that are gonna be here now, and then it's almost gonna feel like a bit samey between the different worlds and the different series. So I am a little bit worried about that, and I do hope that he maintains that separation. I also want him to just spend a little bit more time polishing the writing. I complained about this endlessly. I know you guys are sick of it, but I feel like there's so many things in this book that were cool conceptually, but the execution didn't land for me. And I want to see, more time and care being put into the future books so that we don't get this kind of like, it feels almost like a mishmash of scenes together, and just
it was excessive. I think you had some good examples that you sent of like, there'd be 9 words
wrong grammatically, or is it just like a personal preference thing? Like
it'd be like 9
and stuff.
There'd be 9 words in a single paragraph in italics kind of thing, and not words that are Cosmere specific. It's almost like this is where I want the reader to know I'm putting emphasis, or the period thing that fourth.
I didn't notice any of that, so I feel, but that's not grammatically incorrect.
No, it's not.
It's just a stylistic annoying thing for some people.
I think part of why it's a little frustrating is in the case of like italics and ellipses and the like a frequent amount even within the narration and the period thing. While I think all these things can be utilized, when they're utilized a lot over the course of a 1,300 page book, it starts to feel like the reader is not, I'm not saying that this is how Sanderson feels, but like the reader isn't trusted to put emphasis on certain words. And I think when people, I like YA, so I'm not trying to say all YA books do this or that this is inherently bad, but when YA does it, people trash on it a lot because they act as though it's like more holding your hand to help get you to the conclusion, and that you can't just read a paragraph and understand through the use of the language what he's conveying. It has to have emphasis. It's like people that put tons of words in caps constantly in text messages. And I think it can feel, I think that's part of the modern feeling that people were getting. It's not just word choice, but the level that Christy has pointed out that is used. And I will add, I do think that people are more critical of it outside of Sanderson. Like they would be critical if they saw it in a Fourth Wing or they saw it in something that was YA. But here they're like, well, Sanderson has his reasons. And I think that that's where there's some arguing in the fandom as well, because yeah, it's just not the same treatment that every other author gets a little bit. Sorry, Christy, I a little bit took over. I just wanted to, I feel like you seem apologetic about pointing this out. I don't want you to feel apologetic because I think it's perfectly legitimate to bring up.
Oh, no, it's valid. I just don't know. I didn't know what you meant. And I didn't know if it's like technically wrong because I'm obviously not a writer. Like all I do is scientific writing. So it's very dry. There's no bells and whistles of any kind. So
no
I'm like,
personality.
Is it wrong to do that? Like, I don't know.
No worries. And again, like it is also kind of just like a personal preference kind of thing, I guess. But I do, okay, but there were some instances that, sorry to get into like super specifics, but like, I feel like, okay, sorry, one specific part, I think was, I don't think this was even the prompts that we were talking about. I'm gonna get into it anyway. What was it like? Taravangian was going like, you know, you're just like, you're gonna experience the tiniest bit of what I feel, and I'm like, I feel like that just sounds, I don't know, a little bit silly. I feel like if an editor went through it, they would have taken out, they would have replaced like a tiniest bit with, you know, a fraction or a modicum. I think those words would have felt more heavy, more emotionally impactful, rather than you're just going to experience the tiniest bit of what I feel. So
That
it's like,
it's pretty high. That's pretty hyper specific.
I know, but it's like a lot.
Okay, that's all right.
It's all of these very like small parts that, you know, seem small in isolation, but when you have it permeate throughout the entire book, it adds up. And like, so I just want to see a bit more refinement in the future.
I want to add that I think there's a difference between this happening within dialogue, which is, I actually pulled up an example. I think there's a difference between something happening in dialogue versus in the narration, because people don't talk formally. And when you have narration, and this is a thing that got brought up in the criticisms, him responding to criticism, thing, is that it makes sense for the narration to maybe sometimes be slightly more casual if it's meant to represent specific characters. I actually really like that style of writing, but I also want it to truly feel like it matches specific characters, as opposed to it's casual because it makes them more human, you could say, or more accessible. That feels less tied to characters specifically and more just like you kind of having a bridge of relatability to them. But I wanted to point out, Christy had sent this example, and I want to pull it up on the screen.
What did I say?
So this is dialogue. So, you know, it says who despite her words to the contrary doesn't actually seek the greater good. Admit it, Yasna, you only seek your greater good. You protect your kingdom and your people above others. Your philosophy is deeply flawed, for you cannot know what is best for all. A mortal cannot think of Roshar. It's like, that might be helpful to narrators. But and again, that's in a debate, so I feel like that's slightly not the best example because they're trying to really convey, you know, what they're saying, but it wasn't just in that debate, and it's not just in dialogue. There were a lot of instances of it in the narration as well. And I think part of why it's not as noticeable, I'll add, because Roger, I feel like I wasn't quite seeing it at first. Those pages are pretty big. So I feel like even though, and I think it's almost easier for Chrissy to notice it because you were reading digitally, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and that tends to like make everything bigger. So in a single paragraph, you like see them so much
No,
more
also
often.
it's like the whole page has like 13 italics. Yeah.
Because when it's going further this way, they feel further apart. Then once you like condense and blow it up, and suddenly all the amount of them, I think, becomes
Also, his answer was kind of a cop out where it's like, well, I'm really just translating their words, and so like
I did think it'd be funny if truly he translated it to actual, like, uses whatever the Urban Dictionary like word of the year is. It's like every single book it becomes more and more like they're saying whatever the new current thing, like very demure, you know, like that'd be kind of if it really truly became
Very mindful.
Yes, very mindful, very demure. That'd be rather amusing. You know, a book that I feel like does that a little bit is Gideon the Ninth. But I think that I'm going to say again, for anybody that didn't watch that video, I don't know that anybody minds in action. Well, some people maybe, but a lot of the fans who are having this feeling, they don't mind the existence of those things. They mind that it feels different than previous Stormlight books. And I just know some people will say, well, language evolves. And I don't know that I feel language evolved that much from the end of Rhythm of War until today, which is like starting a day later, couple days in. I mean, maybe, but I just think language evolves pretty drastically over time. So it makes sense if language like there would be a couple of instances where maybe a character heard like Lift hearing something from, you know, some other random person, and then she says it and they're like, that's not a bad word here. I don't know that. I mean, that scene, I don't even know if that was really necessary, but I just feel like it's getting condensed to things like that. And you're like, I don't think that's what people who have this criticism are actually talking about necessarily. I also don't think they're talking about all right versus okay. I think they're talking about the tonal shift, but I don't want to speak on everybody's behalf. And we did already kind of have a full discussion on that. Which isn't to say, Christy, you shouldn't have brought any of this up. I'm glad you brought it up. But anyway.
Christy, can I just ask, when you read physically, do you sub-vocalize or not?
Yes.
Yeah. See, that's exactly why I can't read physically anymore, because I sub-vocalize like a lot, and it makes reading so slow.
What does that mean? Sorry.
It's when you are saying the words in your head. So
Okay.
it's like you're reading aloud, but
You almost have like an internal narrator.
exactly.
Can I tell you something stupid? I don't know what else reading is.
Well, but some people don't read like that. Some people
I know,
do
I don't
not hear a
understand it.
voice in their head. I don't understand it either, but that is not a thing for some
I
people.
don't know that I hear a voice in my head when I read.
like,
Which is
that's
why I'm
reading.
like, what are you talking about?
But we have
I
voices
know.
in our head all the time.
Yeah,
But
same.
I'm like, that's reading though, right? I feel stupid.
It's not
but
that. Yeah, that's
I
it,
don't-
and that's why I can't read physically, because it causes me to read physically so slowly that I get aggravated. So I'm not necessarily surprised that you got aggravated with this book, because it's very long. If I had read it physically and sub-vocalized the whole thing, I probably would have thrown the book against a wall at some point.
and
but
sub-vocalized
I
with
read this way for the previous books, right? And I didn't have the problem.
Yeah,
Yeah, but this
I
book
was-
is also longer.
way longer.
I know they're all long though, and I don't know the extra like 100 pages broke Christy. But I think when you sub-vocalize and you have all of the like M dashes, or not so much M dashes, but when you have like ellipses and italics as often as there were, and you're sub-vocalizing, so you have to do it whenever he says, you know, like if there's an ellipses, you're pausing and stuff. It's
So that's probably why it doesn't bother me at all, because I don't do that. Like I don't even notice it.
so would you say you ignore those things then?
Yeah, I don't pay attention really at all.
Then why are they there? That's the thing. If they're so frequent that they get ignored and or annoy people,
Well,
who
I
do
ignore it pretty much
sub-vocalize.
anytime, even when I'm doing like scientific writing. The only time I sub-vocalize is if I'm actually like trying to read something out loud because if somebody told me that it didn't make sense. Then I'll go back and like read it out loud to myself and be like, okay, I kind of see it now. But like when I'm
Right.
just reading, I don't
I
notice
think
at
when
all.
When it's used more sparingly, though, it even for someone like yourself, I think the general takeaway from editors is that when it's not used as frequently, then when it is there, it has a little more punch to it.
Well, I understand that. I get the. It sounds like you guys saying that it should have been used more with intent, and because it's so ubiquitous, it no longer feels intentional to like actually drive home emphasis where it needed to be. I understand what you're saying.
I'll give my theory, which is, you know, we're never going to know. But my guess is when you're so in the trenches of writing, you don't maybe even like if you're really working on, okay, now I'm working on this chapter or now I'm working on this next percentage of the book. It kind of exists outside the rest of it to a point where at that point, I just want to be really clear. I know he said he's edited more than he's ever been, which is, you know, I'm glad that if this isn't a situation where people assume like, oh, they're successful, they don't get edited anymore because it'll sell anyway. I don't think
Yeah, but
that's
he
what's
also said
happening.
that he ignores half of it. He's
Well,
like, yeah, but I'm more strong in what I believe, and I'm telling what I
don't-
want to tell, and I ignore the edit.
I think he meant that more for like what he put in as far as the content itself. I don't imagine Sanderson's fighting tooth and nail. Like I have to have all these italics. I think editing, I want to be really clear. I like italics. There's nothing literally wrong with there being things in italics. Like you were saying, Roger, it's not grammatically incorrect. It's more like a preferential thing.
Stylistic
And
choice.
yeah, it's stylistic choice, and it's going to vary from editor to editor, which is, you know, too much or too little. But I think some other editors would look at the amount and be like, you use a lot of italics. I think it would have been that simple. And
Is that what you're
I-
talking about? Because you talked about some editor that he used to have that was really good at like line editing. Is that what he would have changed? Is that what line editing would be?
I
He would
feel
change
like
some of the
he would've-
italics and stuff.
I would think
Maybe.
so. I'm curious because
I
when he
think it
talked about
depends, like when I'm marking, like the grammatical stuff, it can oh sorry, I'm just not on my tripod. It can get annoying, but also I have to learn to like switch that off, because if it's not technically wrong or it's not actually going to change my
Yeah.
mark, I have to just learn to ignore it. And it may well be that with a book of this size, with how much detail there is, maybe the editors, they just have to choose their hills to die on, and that just isn't the hill that they want to die on.
Then it also feels like his editors are more in-house now, right? Because he has a lot of like internal Dragonsteel editing. So how much does Tor, the actual publisher, put into his books
I was
anymore?
wondering that.
He
I
does
was
still
wondering that
have
too.
an editor at Tor, but I think it does go through Peter more than Tor.
I will say
You know-
though, like he can write whatever he wants. It does come down to personal preference. I'm just saying that this does affect my personal enjoyment and my reading experience, which is why even though I liked how it ended and I liked a lot of things that happened in this book, in the end, like I still feel like it's a 3-star book for me because of just like how.
Are you going to continue the series, or are you done after this one?
Oh, no, I'm still gonna. I'm definitely
Okay.
still gonna keep reading. I don't think I can stop now. Some cost fallacy.
Books in.
And I know you're reiterating this point, Christy, but I also want to kind of back you on the fact that it is certainly a preference, and I don't think any of us are saying it shouldn't exist. And certainly there are instances, like I was saying this a few times, there is a difference between something being capitalized or something being small caps, like we talked about with the odium, or excuse me, the honor perspectives, Stormfather perspectives. There's a difference in that versus he is choosing it to allow you to know where he wants the emphasis in a sentence, and sometimes he really wants you to know where he wants the emphasis in a sentence, and it can feel a little bit like hand-holding, just a tiny bit. Which isn't necessarily a bad thing. I mean, a lot of people have praised Stormlight for being a lot more accessible than they would have ever anticipated. And many a time he's talked about how his world building is so intense and there's so much to what's happening that he doesn't want the writing to be something that you then have to work through. But in a way, I think, and maybe Christy, this is something you can agree with or disagree with, in a sense, you now feel like you're working through it because it's become distracting to you a little bit. Would you say that's accurate?
It definitely impacts the reading experience. Yeah. That's it. I'm done. I don't want to talk about this.
I noticed the tonal shift. I noticed it becoming a little bit campier and more superhero-y, but I think that if it's true that the italics are more prevalent and he's doing more of those like devices with extra emphasis than he was previously, I can understand people who do more sub-vocalizations feeling like that is even like emphasizing the change in tone more, because it makes it a little bit more melodramatic when you're reading it. So I can see, I understand better.
That is, I think, 100% a good way to capture that conversation. Did anybody want to add before we I have Christy, you're laughing at something.
Sarah's ready.
No,
Sarah, please.
I'm just talking about how much time I spent on talking about this.
Well, I'm just going to talk about it more. So,
Okay.
So that was like the writing and all that is definitely something I noticed within this book. And even though I do agree that he has a simpler like writing style, because that's one of the things that like drew me into his books in the first place, and like has been a pro for me reading his books, is like I don't particularly care about like technical writing or anything most of the time, but it was so noticeable in this one for me. So I'm hoping that going forward there is, to use very mindful, I hope he is more mindful going forward. And I think that having a break from Stormlight books can maybe help with that. And also the way that he is planning to write and release Ghostbloods, I think that
I am excited.
Mhm.
that can really be good for him to kind of be like, look at this whole trilogy and does it all make sense tonally together?
Yeah, I am excited. I can't imagine too. It's a huge undertaking, and I don't want the conversation to be like, yeah, but like, sometimes he used a lot of italics. I don't want that to be reducing all of what he put in, because I feel like sometimes it can seem like that's what's dominating I guess, the conversations around Wind and Truth. And there is so much that is an unbelievable level of effort and proficiency,
The world is
understanding.
cool. The gods are cool. Screw the
Yeah.
italics. Get over it, Christy. Listen on audio.
Hey, but he's writing it specifically this way, so I am experiencing the story that he wants to tell.
Which is very dramatic for your internal narrator.
Is anyone going to be rereading this book anytime
Not
soon?
immediately.
Are you going to reread it right now?
Not straight away. I will do like I did for Rhythm of War probably in a month or two. And I think the reread is going to be better than the first read.
You should reread physically and then see what you think.
Absolutely not.
Sophia be like, can't do it. There will be books being
Okay, wait.
thrown.
I have a perfect way to end this video, okay? So give me just a moment, everyone. Everybody
Oh.
hold. Everybody hold.
Drum roll, please.
No, wrong
Oh, is this a
instrument.
thing?
Wrong instrument. Yep.
Oh,
Sound, no copyright.
no copyright.
Paladin. Now just imagine Nail crying. Yay! That was great. Good job, Paladin. That was great work.
Amazing.
You've done a really good job.
Now imagine that times like 100-fold.
All of it sweeping. And then I think even music was in italics.
too. To be fair.
That's why he cried.
I'll be starting everything over next year, and I think this book will improve upon reread. I actually think all of Zeth's stuff is going to improve on reread for sure. Now that we
Mhm.
have more context, we'll have a better understanding of what was going on with him.
Mm.
But I do think when, 7 years down the line, when we're getting ready for Stormlight 6, maybe that's when the rereads will restart. That didn't make any sense. The rereads
I'm
will
gonna read
start.
Mistborn before Ghostbloods comes out, but I probably won't read Stormlight before that.
Yeah, I'll
Yeah, I
definitely
don't-
reread Mistborn.
I don't want to reread Mistborn Era 2 again. I don't.
I don't
Wait.
need to.
Cosmere spoilers. I don't want to read about Wayne being like, "But was it a good explosion?" I don't want that. I'm just like, dude, come on. Sazin is nice right now, and you're being a doofus. Anyway, okay, so
I think Wind and Truth will definitely
Wayne
improve on reread though, because
and
there was a lot of like, what are we doing? What's
Mhm.
going on? And so I think I probably missed some details in some moments that might make it more impactful on reread. I don't know. I'll be curious.
I just like all the little quotes. The change hearts, not maps.
That's a good quote.
that feels like it should be on a t-shirt.
It does. Like I need it on a sticker,
Doctors Without
a
Borders.
water bottle. Change hearts, not maps.
Yeah. Well, this was a very fun, really long discussion.
It was a really long book. We had to.
But it was a really long book. There was a lot.
We did break the originally it was for parts 1 and 2 or days 1 and 2. Then it was 3, 4, 5, and now it's like 6 through 10. So there was a lot to talk about. Also.
Proportionally, we've talked the less time about the second half. than the
That's
first.
true. That's true.
Yeah.
I like how when I pulled up that terrible flute playing, it was like, but also wouldn't you rather listen to Ashitaka's theme from Princess Mononoke? And I'm like, I really would. I don't know if you saw it in the corner. Anyway, this was very fun. And I'm really appreciative for all of you for getting to read it with all of you, getting to have these discussions, the fact that all of you were willing to give up so much of your time to have these chats. It's been a really fun way to kind of put a final note on this. I mean, this is monumental, right? I think for a lot of us, this is kind of a once in a lifetime feeling of like, oh my gosh, Stormlight 5, here we are. So it was really fun to get to experience it with everybody. If you want to support charity, check out World Hoppers merch. And it's not just clothes, it comes on a bunch of other stuff too. So that'll be linked. Check out everybody's channels. A big thank you to everybody for joining. A big thank you to Roger for making sure our thoughts are valid because he's a man and women can't have valid thoughts without men around. So thanks for that. Yeah. That came from somewhere for anybody that's confused. It came from something. So it's
Just go read the comment section of the critique about Sanderson's comments.
I wonder if it had been a bunch of men, if they'd be like, there's no women here. So I don't think it's valid.
No, I don't think so.
I don't think so either.
And they probably discount me because I'm a gay man, so it's okay.
That's
You're not the right kind. We need
Yeah,
it straight.
because I'm wearing pink. I couldn't possibly have a valid opinion.
You'll have to make sure Sean joins us in future.
That's true. He
You
won't have
make
read them at
Wind in
all.
nothing.
He won't
Nothing
even read them.
that
Still be
guy.
more valid than ours.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. My
Still.
wife told me about it, and that's all I needed to not only have an opinion, but have the superior opinion. Okay, I have signed off that there's valid conversation happening. Anyway, but yeah, check out World Hoppers merch and other videos. Thanks so much for joining, everybody. Luna knows we're wrapping up. She just walked in. She wants to be fed, so I'm going to go do that. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks, everybody. Bye.